This is the Literary License Podcast with your hosts, Vicky Ray, John Wilson, and Keith Shorgo. Discussing book to screen and everything in between. Coming at you from the UK and USA.
They keep it real.
We're all in our private traps, clamped in them, and none of us can ever get out. We scratch and claw, but only at the air, only at each other. And for all of it, we never budge an inch.
Sometimes we deliberately step into those traps.
I was born in mine. I don't mind it anymore.
Oh, but you should. You should mind it.
Oh, I do. But I say I don't. Understand it. I don't hate her. I hate what she's become. I hate the illness.
Wouldn't it be better if you put her someplace?
You mean an institution? A madhouse?
It's guaranteed to exterminate every insect in the world. But they do not tell you whether or not it's painless. And I say, insect or man, it should always be painless.
Your time so empty?
No. Well, I run the office and tend the cabins and grounds and do little errands for my mother. The ones she allows I might be capable of doing.
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
Hello, welcome to Season 2 of the Literary License Podcast for the month of Clothes Make the Killer. This episode will be covering Psycho, and another thing is that we've now added an extra show to our roster, which will be covering the shows of Alfred Hitchcock, which is to help celebrate his birthday if he was still alive. And that will be coming in 2019. We'll do a special episode to end the series of Season 2 with 2 more Alfred Hitchcock's. But to start out with, we're doing Psycho, written by Robert Bloch and directed by Alfred Hitchcock. So to no ado, I'd like to say hello to John.
Hello.
And Vicky.
Hi, guys.
And our special guest, Vincent DeSante, director of Never Hike Alone.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome back.
Good to be back. Good to be back.
So before we get into the main meat of the podcast, what we're going to do is talk about what we've been up to since our hiatus in August. So to start out with, Vincent, what have you been up to since the last time we've seen you?
I guess the last time we've seen you guys, Never Hike Alone hadn't come out yet, right?
I don't think so, no. Well,
Okay.
wait, no, we did. Yeah, it did. I think it just came out.
Yeah.
Okay, it just came out.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I've just been riding that wave.
Nice.
It's been a fun ride. It's taken me a lot of different places. We've been taking it to different film festivals and traveling with it and meeting different people. And people have reached out to me. It's been a really, really fun and humbling experience. Like this October, we're going to be doing 5 different screenings, maybe even 6. Every weekend in October, Never Hike Alone will be playing on a big screen somewhere in the country, which is pretty crazy to think about after last year. I was just happy to be
actually. Very well done.
Thank you. And then other than that, I've just been working a lot of freelance and TV shows and films and things like that. Not directing, but more working on the producerial and directing, assistant directing side, with hopes of hopefully submitting a script pretty soon to get picked up and, do my next feature.
Cool.
Now, I believe last time we spoke to you, you were looking to put together on Never Hike Alone 2. How is that going?
That's still in the works. I've actually got some really cool traction on that. We've pulled in some new people. We've pulled in it's kind of a secret project right now, but we are working on it. It's a sensitive subject because Friday the 13th is still up in the rights battle. I was hoping by now there would be more answers, and the answers I got weren't necessarily the ones I wanted to hear, just mostly that the legal process is probably going to fall a certain way, and then there's going to be further appeals, and it's going to keep going and going. So with that kind of time window and no rush in the way, we've just kind of stepped back and said, you know what, let's figure out how we can do something in the meantime, because we know that doing Never Hike Alone 2 would be $1 million plus type venture. Yeah. And so going something like that for a fan film would be very legally risky. But what we can do is look at other ways of at least teasing it and bringing some stuff to life. So I've talked to a few people, and we have a plan. I don't want to give anything away now because we're going to drop things for surprises. Probably not this year, but starting next year, I think you'll see some new tidbits from the Never Hike Alone world and where that's going and what we want to do with it. And I think it will give a little bit more of a taste of what that film would be like. Because it would be more traditional. We wouldn't do exactly what we did in Never Hike Alone 1. It would be more of a traditional style movie. But obviously, Tom Matthews is back. We talk every month or so and just catch up and talk about what we want to do. The story is all done. We've talked about it front to back. It's just a matter of now looking at that script once we budget and saying what can we do and what can we do, and then we'll just scale down or up depending on what we can do. I've added a few more people. Obviously Andrew's back and I'm back, and most of the crew from the original film is back, and we've added more effects people. I'll let you guys will be the first to hear, but a gentleman by the name of Justin Mabry, who is one of the co-owners and founders of Trick or Treat Studios, has joined our team to help us design a brand new Ghost Jason. Wow. So elevated up from what we did from, basically what we did for Hike Alone 1. It was off the shelf products that we purchased from CFX, the hood, the hands. Then we made a custom mask. So now we're working on a custom hood, custom hands. We're going to update the mask a little bit more and bring it to a little bit of a higher level production value, but keep basically the same overall look. So we're working on that right now, and that will be kind of our first little thing that we're going to show fans and be like, hey, this is where we're going, and this is where we want to take it. So we just want to, show that our next attempt at this is going to be at an even higher, value level from a production standpoint.
As a fan myself, I just say bravo to you for creating these stepping stones to that IP and keeping it alive. So thank you.
Cool. Yeah. It's a pleasure. I'm a big fan myself. So it's, as much as I love working on stuff and getting paid for things, if I could get paid to sit at home and work on Never Hike Alone all day, that would be the one thing I'd want to work on.
Well, trust us. We completely understand because, this podcast means a lot more to us too. If we can just do this for the rest of our lives.
And I'm also forgetting, we ran a very successful home video campaign that we were able to pull off. We did basically a pre-order system, so everything was prepaid for. We weren't building an inventory of things to make a profit. We were just saying, if you want to purchase it, it's basically going to cost this much to run through production, so reserve your copy now. We're at the tail end of that right now. I've already submitted all the Blu-ray materials. There's a great little half-hour behind-the-scenes making of Never Hike Alone on the disc. There's commentary. All of our trailers are on there. And we did a lot of work to make it as professional as possible. And I'm really happy on it. So I should be receiving the discs probably within the next 3 weeks, and then we're going to start shipping. So that's going to be a big thing for us. We've climbed up in views. We're up to like 430,000 views right now on YouTube, and it's growing at a rate of like 10 to 12,000 views a week right now. And we have the Halloween season coming up, so we're looking to get a good boost, get over 500,000, and start climbing towards 1 million, because I think that's our goal. We want to get it up to 1 million, and really turn back to the studios and say, look, like, it's positive. we got the views, we've got the fans behind us. Please just give us a chance to tell this story the way the fans want to see it. And that's really our appeal right now. And in the meantime, it's my job to go out and continue making original IP, and show them that I can handle different sizes of projects. And that's basically been the two-prong attack to this: is build my personal career, show them that I can handle larger projects, and then just keep creating good content for Never Hike Alone and show them that we know Friday the 13th. We know what the fans want.
Excellent. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go onto that website when we finish here and get my copy of the Blu-ray.
Okay.
Me too.
Well, no, the Blu-ray.
I've showed it to everyone.
Been sold. The Blu-ray's been sold out. But if you write me an email, anyone who's actually missed it, so we were smart about this. We knew there might have been some stragglers, and we also knew that there's a potential that a disc could get broken in the mail or one could show up and be defective. We've ordered extra, so there's a couple hundred extra, and if you just write to contact@wompstompfilms.com and say please reserve me a Blu-ray, I can put you on the wait list, and there still is room. So there's plenty of room right now. Time I check, I think we're to about 100 people, and we still have another 100 that we can go. So if you want to write me and do that, we'll put you on the list, and you'll get a confirmation email. And once we've sent out all the
I have to have it.
I know.
Once we've sent out all the backers stuff, and we're going to give it a couple weeks, wait to hear back, and then we'll just start reaching out to everybody individually on the list and just start popping them out.
Excellent. So, John, what have you been up to?
So last weekend I actually watched Suspiria for the first time, which we are actually covering next month, because the remake is actually retelling. I don't know what it's considered, but
it's like a reboot.
A reboot, yeah, I guess, is coming out October 31st on Halloween. So I kind of just wanted to see that, to see what it's like. But I'm going to save my commentary for that for next month. But I also went last night to go see The Nun.
Oh my God!
I will just say, without giving anything away, the best part of the film is
the trailers.
Thaisa Farmiga, which by the way, 6 Degrees of Separation or So Separation, is the sister of Vera Farmiga, who played Norma Bates in Bates Motel. I would say, go check it out, but just realize it's gratuitously filled with jump scare, to the point where it's you have a heart attack every time, a next minute after minute. So I'm make sure you bring your defibrillator. So.
And what about yourself, Victoria? What are you even up to?
Oh, nothing. I just got back from New York, visiting all of you, and those who shall remain nameless. But just try to get back into the groove of things since I got home. It's a long, arduous journey.
Well, myself, I went to Toronto and then went to visit my family. And a big shout out to brand new fans. It seems like our trip to upstate New York boosted our fan base a bit.
Everybody likes the T-shirt.
Yay!
And we got the new T-shirt organized for season 1, so that will be available. We'll be having information about that in our competition that we'll now be holding on a monthly basis. It's a one-of-a-kind T-shirt that all our guest co-hosts will receive a copy as well. And there also will be a special competition, as I said before, but there might be a few surprises within the season 2 in order to be able to get one of these one-of-a-kind T-shirts. Another thing, I guess we need to give a shout out to Bobby Joe Bates, Terry Ann Otts, Pamela Spencer, Brianna Gary, and Shaylee Kelly to say thank you and welcome aboard. And they're all very excited because they're now pushing our content a lot on their social medias. So I want to say thank you for that. And what else have I been up to? I've done a lot of hard partying with my nieces and nephews who are about 30 years younger than me, and I am now trying to catch up and realizing how old I am. So.
And let me tell you, I was with his nieces and nephews, and the struggle is real. 2 weeks later, and I still feel like shit. So when the tequila comes out, it's time to leave the room.
Precisely. They chug tequila and they mix it with some kind of Snapple ingredient. So, yes.
Oh, God.
No, that's just the chaser.
Snapple and tequila? Jeez.
It's the chaser.
You just ruined that whole bottle of tequila there.
They're savage. That's all I can say.
I'm just glad I don't drink. I still probably be comatose now.
That's all right. I drink enough for the both of us.
So before we get to forming the plot episode, what I need to mention is give a special shout out to Seat Giant at www.seatgiant.com, where I've just now purchased my tickets for Christina and the Queens, which are coming to Brixton here in London. So I was able to purchase my tickets. And in the discount section, I put LL Podcast and got a 20% discount. So if you're looking for tickets, either for fun fairs, theaters, special events, sporting events, or concerts, go to www.seatgiant.com.
Scorpions tomorrow night. Yes.
Yes, Vicky is stuck in the 80s, and we are.
I am, goddammit. And you are glad that I am, because that's before I got stuck in the 2000s.
So if you go to www.seatgiant.com and go to discount code after you purchase your tickets and put LL Podcast, you'll get 20% off as well. So now we come to the forming the plot sequence, and we're going to give you a reason why we're covering Psycho. Now, the reason why we're covering Psycho basically is the number one thriller film of all time by critics in the America's Top 100s. And it's also a great book written by Robert Bloch, which is quite interesting, and also a way to spear off our Alfred Hitchcock series as well.
I had no idea it was rated R. So we watched it the other day ago. It said rated R. I go, wow, what's it rated R for? It's like, it's the bra scene.
Now, the important thing to remember about Psycho is a 1950s thriller novel written by American writer Robert Bloch. Now, the thing is, a lot of people think that this is based on Ed Gein, which 2 years earlier, whilst Robert Bloch was writing it, he actually lived probably about 20 miles away from Wisconsin, where Ed Gein was dressing up in women's skins and decorating his house. And
Ed Gein.
Yeah. I mean, the good thing about Ed Gein, I mean, he did add a little bit of his own personal touch to interior design, but besides that, but the thing is that Psycho wasn't actually based on Ed Gein. After the whole Ed Gein thing came and Robert Bloch found out about it, he did add a little bit to the last chapter to actually incorporate the Ed Gein theology into Psycho, but Psycho isn't based on Ed Gein, though a lot of people do believe that. Then what would happen would be that the book would go out to print. But before it went out to print, Alfred Hitchcock became interested in it, and the rest is history, which we'll get into within the film segment of it. Now, Robert Bloch did write 2 sequels, which is Psycho 2, which is not based on the movie Psycho 2. Robert Bloch wanted to write a sequel. He put in forward his ideas for Psycho 2, and they were rejected, so he made a book out of it, which gives Norman an interesting thing, which would include raping and murdering of nuns, and a filming of Psycho that Norman Bates decides to haunt the film set of. And the Psycho House came out, and that basically kind of flopped. It wasn't a really big critical success. But interestingly enough, Chat Williamson, about 2 years ago, came out with a book called Psycho Sanitarium, which he cleverly was able to put in a sequel to Psycho, which fits nicely between Psycho the movie and Psycho the novel, and Psycho 2 the movie and Psycho 2 the novel, which are 2 different things. And he's able to set it with Norman Bates in a sanitarium and what happened until his release. So it's quite an interesting book. So if you're a fan of Psycho, I highly recommend Chet Williamson's Psycho Sanitarium. So to no further ado, we're going to discuss Psycho by Robert Bloch. And Vicky, would you like to give us a synopsis of the book, please?
Yes. Phoenix secretary Marion Crane is on the lam after stealing $40,000 from her employer in order to run away with her boyfriend, Sam Loomis, who is overcome by exhaustion during a heavy rainstorm. Traveling on the back roads to avoid the police, she stops for the night at a ramshackle hotel called the Bates Motel and meets the polite but highly strung proprietor, Norman Bates, a young man with an interest in taxidermy and a difficult relationship with his mother and or other women.
So, Vincent, what did you think of the book, Psycho?
This is kind of funny because I until recently, until we were going to do this podcast, I didn't realize that Psycho was based on a book. I had watched the film a lot. Yeah. I'd watched the film a lot in film school, something we studied very heavily. So going back into the book, I was excited. I kind of felt the same way I did about First Blood when I saw the Rambo films. Then I went back and read First Blood, and I was like, whoa, this is way different. I think the difference between the book and the movie here is that you definitely get more of, why am I forgetting the Norman Bates's character? I think that was my favorite part of the book, was seeing things from his perspective, the way you didn't get to see it in the movie, because the book ultimately starts off from his perspective, and you get that introduction to him and his mother's, relationship. And I thought going through it was just very interesting to see how he divulged that information about the reveal, getting into the backwards eventually, that you realize that the mother is in, Norman's head. And it was kind of like, as I was trying to read the book as if I had not seen the movie, and try to give it its credence of like, okay, when is it going to reveal? But I'm going to pretend like I don't know. And it was a really good, it was a good adventure. I liked the back and forth. It was more Norman's story than it was the other characters. It was like, I almost felt for Norman as he was trying to cover up. And every time somebody was coming and talking to him and talking about, the inner monologue about, okay, if I can just keep my story straight and I can get this person to go away. Anytime a book, you're getting into the deeper kind of realms of the character, like the detective character or the private investigator character and his journey. Like in the movie, it's very short, but in the book, you go into how long it actually takes them to kind of nail Norman down, and how he's kind of like thinking he's going to get away with it. And then slowly seeing like each little thing that pulled out from under him, and he's, slowly receding, having to make those choices to continue his murderous ways and do that. I really thought that was interesting. The other interesting thing that I thought that was very different from the movie within the book was that he was, described as portly, and he kind of had an Ed Gein kind of look to him in that. And I thought that was kind of funny, the way that I actually thought that was something that Psycho did really well, was when they brought Anthony Perkins on, was that it almost made him less conspicuous. And in the film, because he's kind of this portly mama's boy who is definitely very weird and odd, that was something that I thought was really interesting from that, because I'd always imagined, Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates. So kind of creating this new character for Norman in my head as I'm reading this book was kind of fun. I mean, it was like, wow, I didn't think of him that way. I thought of him, much differently than I saw him before, and how he
like Anthony Perkins. I had no idea. I've never read the book either until, just recently. But I didn't know that his character was portly and greasy or whatever the way they described it. So I always thought of him as Anthony Perkins.
I, for some reason, kept envisioning, I don't know why, Truman Capote, just because it was like, like short, stubby, like, balding kind of like character. And and unmenacing, right? Because I think it was not going too much into character of the film, because we'll talk about that later, but it was as if there was a different type of trust. Like, oh, this guy can never hurt me. He looks like he sews, or, he like sits and knits an Afghan, like he's not that type of a menacing character. Whereas, the other Bates that was in the movie is more charming, and there was something about him that made you want to trust him,
Yeah. I thought the other funny thing was kind of like, it's a book of its time as well. Like the roles of the males in the film, in the book, and the roles of the female. And what's Marion's sister's name?
Lila.
Lila, and like how she was described as like, she'll never shut up, and she's always like badgering.
yeah.
And stuff like, but she was right. And I was like, it's kind of fun, because that's how relationships were in the 50s. It was like the men were always the ones leading the way, but they were always stupid, and the wives were always whispering in their ears, like, this is, do this, like you should do this. And
it's also the small town way of life, because even she just gets so frustrated at some point, and she's like, the sheriff is just like, no, it's totally fine, whatever.
Yeah.
He just went down the road, and she's like, am I the only one who cares about my sister? Like, what the hell?
Yeah, all the men are so inept in the book, and they're just like, oh yeah, he's fine. Norman's a great guy.
Yeah.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I said
no, go ahead.
What I found quite interesting was the Mary Crane. Her name's Mary Crane in the book, and about her relationship with Sam. It's like, I've always, before reading the book, I always just assumed that I didn't realize how they met, but it's like Sam's doubt about Mary, that he doesn't really know this woman at all.
Yeah.
And I thought that was quite interesting. And the whole thing about how Mary sacrificed her life for her younger sister.
Yeah. That was really nice. I really liked that aspect of the book.
Well, there's also just that common theme thread of mother, right? Because they do talk about even their mother and in her relationship with her mother, and kind of, not to digress, but like when we did Eleanor for Hill House, right? Yeah. She's the one who had the indolent mother. So how those there's a reoccurring theme of taking care of your mother and the goals and obligations of that, and feeling like you have to do that. And then she kind of then went on to sort of help her sister too. So it was like, now this is her breaking moment to kind of do what she wanted to do with her life.
Well, I think
sounded like she was like typical. Don't you think she sounded like she was like a spinster? Was she all of 27 and she's a spinster?
Yeah, but you got to remember, the book came out in
I know.
So in a way, she was a spinster.
Throwing rocks at the moon in 1959.
Well, I mean, the thing is, if you weren't married at that time by the age of 25, you were a spinster. That's just the way things were. Women didn't have rights at that time. A lot of women weren't able to were able to manage their own money a lot of times. If the husband managed everything, a woman's role in the world was basically to have children and keep the house and
keep the husband happy.
And keep the husband happy.
Don't even go there, you guys.
No, but it just was.
That's the way it was. I mean, women.
It was.
Women's lib, still had a way to come by that time. I mean, women's lib started, 1967, 1968, around
Gloria Steinem years. Yeah.
But before that, I mean, even women's votes didn't really count. I mean, normally the woman would vote the way her husband told her to vote. So you do have this going on in the background during the setting of Psycho. And, Lila, another thing is, because Mary Crane sacrificed her life for her younger sister seemed to have a better career for it. She's off buying, doing this, and everything else.
She went to school, she finished school, so she was able to do what she wasn't able to do.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if, Mary Crane loved Sam, but I think Sam was a tool as to get her out of the current life that she's got. I think she figured, well, I'm too old to go to school. I'm too old to do this. And Sam's her only ticket out of her, her own little prison that she's put herself in. That's what I
wasn't too impressed with Sam, though. As far as a male character, sadly lacking. Just was.
Yeah.
He wasn't
very proactive.
No, and he wasn't like your typical savior kind of guy that most women know, the white knight, so to speak. He seemed very complacent.
Well, I think when he finds out that the money, there's that money angle of what Mary did, it's as if whatever sort of sense of attraction he had to her was yeah, I don't really know if I knew her that well. It all of a sudden just went all out the window, and her poor sister was I need you to step up to the plate here. He's coming to you. So what the hell happened? And
he threw her under the bus, basically. Just he's not even really that upset when he finds out she's murdered.
But I do think that you're dealing with a relationship between Sam and Mary that they met on a cruise ship, and it's basically a holiday romance.
That's true.
And with most holiday romances, it's very rare that they actually consummate into a more loving, long-lasting relationships. It's a travel holiday romance. That's what it was.
You're writing the euphoria of having a vacation, basically.
Well, they also had the distance between them as well. So you got to remember, I mean, you just didn't jump on the flight and fly off to see your other half. I mean, she drove miles. We're talking about days. She drove.
Yeah.
She didn't just, snap her fingers like Samantha Stevens and be wished and pop herself off to see Sam.
Right.
There's a long drive there. And you got to remember that, for him to see her is also a long drive for him. Mm-hmm. So, and considering that he has a general store that he seems to be the only person working at, and he's living in the back room, you got to remember the male's role. He's got to provide, if he's going to get married, he's got to provide a stable home for his wife, who one day they hope to have children. He's got to do that. And he was stuck in his financial obligations. His father left him a store that he made some bad investments, so he's paying off all that. I mean, he's very responsible. Yeah. And while all this is going on, of course, there's, he's very honorable. He goes to church. He's very moralistic. And so, his mind is going to be torn a little bit. I know in the film, which will get discussed after, I mean, he's divorced in the film.
Right.
But I don't think he's divorced here. I think it's more family obligations. And living in a small town, you got to remember that family obligations and being an upstanding member of your community is very, very important. It's very important how the neighbors see you. And he's running a store, so it's even more important that you're moralistic, because you need that small town to keep you thriving as professionally.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a hardware store, because everybody goes there, for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was like interesting with how, there was these moments where they would sidestep or backstep in the timeline of events. And so when, like for instance, that leads up to, Mary getting killed by, Mother or Norman, there's this sort of a play out of the scene of her getting killed. And then the next chapter is a backstep of Norman viewing her and then deciding to go, and then he has this blackout. So I thought it was interesting that in a couple times there's this interesting mechanism to kind of show a differentiation of perception to maybe throw the reader off, because go to what Vince said was, this is my first time reading it, and I'm trying not to think about the movie and thinking about there is an allure of a mystery. You're bought to believe that this is a mother who's doing this, so it's an allure of mystery of trying to keep the reader, it is two separate people, and if you have him black out, maybe it's just him blacking out. But I just thought that was a very interesting mechanism within the book of how he did that.
Not to get into the film yet or anything, but did you notice how they didn't kind of, put the alcoholism into the movie like they had in the book? He was like constantly getting sauced at this point, in the book.
Yeah.
I never do that. Like I said, I've never read the book until last week. And I did like Vince said, I knew there was a book, but I never really, which is why I love doing this podcast with you guys, because I read stuff I normally would never read. And just the whole, it's so not Anthony Perkins. I mean, it's a totally different character when you get to the movie as opposed to the, the character in the novel.
I would say that one thing that I really enjoyed about the novel were the final scenes. Like, I actually preferred the final scenes as they were written in the novel as they were to the movie. Her going down into the basement, I was like, the way it's written in the book, like pulling down like the blanket,
right,
the door. I was like, she's thinking like, I'm gonna go like hide under the stairs and put this blanket over me. But in my head, as I'm reading it, the moment she tears down that blanket and reveals the door, it's like, well, the first thing Norman's gonna do when he comes in is realize that the door is open and go under the stairs. I mean, obviously she never makes it that far, but it was just like I felt it. Like I felt the tension of like, oh my God, like that's the point where I was like, I couldn't let go of the fact that I knew it was coming. And I was like, I can't wait to get to this part. I can't wait to get to this part. And then when she sees it and she hears the voice and it's Norman on the stairs, and it was like the way that built up, I thought that was really good. I thought that the scene within the hotel where Sam's trying to like kind of keep Norman off to the side and distract him, and that building tension of the fact that like he knew that she stopped and went up the stairs, and then reveals that and starts to kind of make that turn, and he's slowly telling that story. And in that story, I thought there was something else that was very interesting, with the fact that he was like, well, I knew how to bring her back and I knew how to do this. And there was a sense of occultism.
Yeah.
And the fact that he did some sort of ritual that makes you wonder, well, okay, like the horror nerd in me is like, did he really somehow channel into the afterlife and split his personality? Like, is it psychological or is it supernatural? And that kind of left a cool thing, especially, he's pulling down like the native blanket. So he must have gone into some type of native spirituality. Yeah. And I thought that was a very interesting angle. The other interesting angle that I thought that was a difference between the movie.
Good angle. I never thought of that.
Yeah, and the one thing I like, it was like, because you guys kind of mentioned the like Sam and Mary's relationship in the movie versus the film. I just thought it was funny how it opened up and it was very sexual, which I think that was something that was pushing in the films at that time.
Big white bra scene, like none of us just like that.
Yeah, we can't keep doing this.
Like that.
But in the book, them writing letters. But what I thought was funny in the movie was that he even says, he's like, "What do you want me to do? Write you letters?" And like, but what I thought was nice in the movie is that later on he is writing her a letter, and I think that there's something very romantic about that. And I thought And yeah, and the back and forth, and yeah, that was kind of like, I kind of wanted to touch on that before too, is that like Sam, them having this distance relationship and not being sure, and them, you know, kind of having the most hope, and yeah, and you know, Marion kind of having, or Mary having that kind of anything to get me out of my life.
Yeah.
And here's this $40,000, and here I'm going to go. And I just thought that was such a good, you know, that's what books do. Books allow you to understand these characters so much more. And I think when I went back and watched the movie afterwards, I had more of an understanding about who these people were. I mean, Hitchcock obviously delivered a film that, you know, it might have not have needed all that. It told everything that needed to tell within that span. But I was, you know, it's just that extra layer of like, oh, okay, now I understand these motivations.
But it was so Hitchcock, though, you know?
Oh, yeah, it was very Hitchcock.
Only he could do. So.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the fact that Norman was the one to kind of give the exposition of his life, and it happens so quick and so jarring, because even I'm sure that Sam didn't expect to, you know, be like, yeah, you know, so, and he literally goes into his uncle and his relationship with his mom. I mean, I like that much better than, like, you know, we'll talk about with the court scene, you know, and the psychiatrist kind of giving a background as to what Norman said versus hearing it from Norman's lips himself. And there's a level of confidence that I have to say, with his character in that book, is we are internally hearing how much he judges himself, you know, regardless of how much his mother judges him, but how much he judges himself. And by the end of the novel, there is this level of confidence that it's almost like, you know, maybe it's a liquid of courage, but it's like, fuck it. You know what? And he just lets it all out.
But I mean, Mother was like a totally third person character throughout the whole novel. As she kind of presented herself in the movie. Like I said, we'll get into that later. But she was her own character. I mean, if you didn't see the movie, it's kind of hard to separate movie and book. I mean, I saw the movie first. I don't know how many times as a little girl, but I mean, you know, the mother part is just like, well, you didn't really know, you know, and in the book it elaborates so much more because she becomes this other person. It's like a whole other character.
Yeah, but she would also, in some ways, you get to hear her perception, especially towards the end, that it's not me, like, it's my son, like, and I'm trying to help him, because you do get to see that, especially when he knows they're lying to him, he goes into almost what I would say, like, what's in Misery? What's her name? The character in Misery?
Catherine.
Yeah, Kathy Bates' character. But anyways, he goes into almost like a dirty birdie phase. He's like, you're dirty. And like, he just goes off in his mind, like, oh, you want to check in? You're liars. And it's not his mom. That's him. Like, he's just, he sees through their bullshit, and he's going to call them out on it. And so you kind of wonder, you know, was it his mother or was it him? You know, and you kind of can say, you know, yes, it's this and all this, and it you know, she's trying to protect him, but at the end of the novel, it is this sort of realization that the mother saying, oh, no, let's be clear, I was the one who was telling my son not to do this, you know, and I was protecting my son, but I'm done protecting him, you know.
Mm-hmm. In the book, I mean, I've read a couple different forums, as you all know. I do all my research. I don't know about you guys. But did he actually, I mean, people were asking in some of the forums about Psycho, you know, how people get into the Comic-Con with, like, Psycho, and they just want to, like, get into the nitty-gritty of it. Do you think he was sexually abused by his mother, or was she just beat the shit out of him? Or
no, I think basically what if you want to go from a psychological aspect here, basically what you kind of have is kind of an Oedipal complex going on here. Basically, we know that Norma Mates' his mother, names her son Norman, which is kind of bizarre. You know, because if you look at the split within the name, Norman is the masculine version of Norma, basically. Yeah. What we have is basically a woman who gives birth. So basically in the book, if you look at Norman's in his 30s, so the story takes place in the 1950s, so that pretty much makes him a product of the 20s.
Yeah,
which basically means his mother was born at the turn of the century. So basically, you got this
Victorian.
So you got this Victorian Christianity thing going through, what's right and what's wrong, the whole prim and proper sort of thing. Basically, the husband runs off. Norma's against men and also of any kind of form. Men are sinners, men are this, men are that. And then what you have is that gets perpetrated onto her son. Her son basically is just his world. His world is his mother. He's bullied in school. He went home and his mother comforted him.
Rejection completely.
Well, also don't forget the relationship she had with her, the mother had with her brother, which she seemed to really like her brother, like in a Flowers in the Attic kind of way, like her brother. So there's that sort of,
Well, I mean, what you also have in the whole scheme of things is just, it's just those two against the world, and his mother's everything. He's not accepted in his society. Basically, his only comfort and understanding is at home with his mother, who's highly, another thing is Norman's highly intelligent. That's one thing that we don't get in the film that you do get in the book. He's got a thirst for knowledge, and knowledge just doesn't really qualm into the small town mentality of things. Then basically what happens is finally his mother takes in a lover, and that's when the house of cards starts tumbling down. And, and I think that when with Norman's character, basically there's another man competing for his mother's attentions. Yeah. And, his mother goes through a different, 180 turnaround. First she's all about sin and all about this, and all of a sudden now she's sinning. And now she's opening a motel. That's not her idea, but it's the boyfriend's idea. Right. They're going to get married, but yet they were having premarital sex in the 1950s. So, you have a lot of psychological aspects going on here within the Norma.
You think it was that bad in the 50s?
Well, and just if you look at the context of how it opens up, where, Mary is having sex with Sam in a hotel. Hotels, are meant to kind of be like the little hideaways. It wasn't just a vacation.
This is like the dollar ticker hotel too.
So it's kind of like off the highway, kind of like, hey, well, at the time, I guess it wasn't off the highway because the highway wasn't built, but it's still like that. Like
sort of like a hotel at downtown Newark.
Yeah. More bang for your buck.
Well, I mean, I think, the thing is, it's basically a bad investment. That's pretty much what it was. An idea that was good, but then, of course, as the world moves on. Well, I mean, it's basically Fairview, or wherever they're living, is basically end up being like Detroit, really. I mean, it's like once something moves away, it becomes like almost like a ghost town, really. So basically, you have all that going on.
That's true, though, about the highways, though, because we've got I-30 right down here, and we got 66 down the road. Yeah. I always take 66 everywhere. I'm a faithful 66 fan. But, everybody heads down I-30, so I can understand where the guy got the concept in the movie. But
and they always say that, like, when a highway comes through, it's like a death of a community, because
it really is.
Pulls everything from that area out,
I mean, there's an interest, speaking about Route 66, there's a lot of interesting documentaries about Route 66 where people will go down Route 66, and a lot of the towns are ghost towns where Route 66 was. I mean, this is a highway that was very famous, that someone actually wrote a song about it. And
who did?
Well,
okay.
I can't remember. I mean, a lot of people have
I know you're talking about.
I technically, in a way, lived off of Route 66 because Mission Boulevard, which is like adjacent to Conning Street, where I lived off of, was part of that. So
it's it's worked out,
yes, that's
not
true.
even a mile down the road for me, Route 66. I'll have to take a picture of it for you and send it to
you. In the 1950s and television's infancy, they had a television show called Route 66. Basically, he's got these two guys who go from town to town on Route 66, and basically having an episode a day, wherever they landed. But I said before, you go down it now, and most of the towns are ghost towns. Yeah. And this
what, though? If you do drive down Route 66, there are the best diners between here and Dallas on Route 66. You guys got to go.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, best food ever.
An interesting take, not to literally sidestep too much, is like, I can't speak highly enough about the show Bates Motel. I think it just gives a very interesting take on Norman and Norma's relationship. It veers, I think, into too early, but then it comes back again.
I've not watched it yet.
It definitely sort of stays the vein of what this story represents. And I just highly suggest people watch it, if not just for Vera and for Freddie, because the performance between the two of them is just so mesmerizing, if you will.
The book definitely made me want to watch that series,
It's
sure.
great. I mean, the end of it is just heartbreaking. There's something I do have to say about Norman as a character. I do feel bad for him. My heart breaks for him. It's kind of like the Jane Voorhees complex. The poor guy didn't really do anything. It was just he's a product of sort of the environment. Well, I think it sucks.
Well, I think that to sum up their relationship, it's the first scene in the book. And I think that, really for me, it was the first scene in the book and the last few chapters in the book that I was really just like, wow, this opened up a new world to me. Like him reading the book. And I just imagined him sitting there and you're like, there he is, just this innocent little kid reading, this innocent guy reading a book. And then his mom comes down and starts going, I know what you're doing in there. Yeah. I know what you're doing.
I know you're reading that stuff.
But then he turns the page and there's a bunch of people sacrificing somebody and you're like, whoa, he really is kind of reading. Get the dynamic of the character of she might have known that she was raising a psychopath.
Yeah.
And she was, and she badgered her.
I don't know if Mom was any better though, Vincent. She was kind of
totally. I mean, she was a
psycho weirdo herself,
Well, it's interesting because if you watch Bates, I would say the one thing that is very interesting is the take on Norma is one that you as a mother, Vicky, would appreciate, is that there's something wrong with your child. And there's something wrong with your child. Are you saying
there's something wrong with all of my
I'm saying, listen, so there's something wrong with your child, but you would do anything to protect your child.
You would.
And there is this motherly instinct that you will sometimes, people look at you like, what are you doing? But when it's something that you can't fix, but you can protect your child and you love your child and you'll do anything for your child, there's that interesting take. But to an outsider or even to Norman for that matter, he just thinks, what is wrong with this woman? Why don't she just leave me alone? To the point where she's
a nagging person though. I mean, she seems like a real nag.
But there's a reason behind it. So there's a deeper story to his character that I just and to
Oh, he's a total tragic. He's totally thespian tragic. I mean, any more tragic than him because he probably would have been a normal person had he been raised by somebody else.
I'm not sure if he would have been that normal because at the end of the day, Norman is not your man's man. I mean, he's bookish. He likes to be alone. He just wants to be left alone with his books. And, he's not
very recluse. Yeah,
okay.
he was the last.
I can dig it.
Yeah, but he was the last one picked for sports. I mean, it's all there. I mean, he's that. Wimpy little kid that no one wants to be friends with in school. He's the kid
That's sad. I can't even thinking about
It's interesting. I was going to say it's interesting that they not interesting. It's funny that they picked Freddie Highmore to play Norman because he actually has ridiculous IQ and speaks 7 languages. He's a professional chess player. If you watch the little in the season or the series finale, they have this little behind the scenes, and all of the cast are just he makes us look stupid. He's just so smart. So it's no wonder they picked him to play that character because he got into literally the mind of Norman and how that same idiosyncrasies of knowing how to manipulate people and do those things.
It's still on Netflix.
I think it's on Netflix. So yeah.
Now I'm intrigued.
I'm really good to watch. Well, what I was going to say was that I think that part of it is the fact that, from the mother's perspective, from Norma's perspective, she doesn't have a companion. All she has is her kid, and her kid kind of becomes this barrier from the world that she can't go out. I mean, especially in the 50s, she's way less desirable as a single mother, as a kid as far as singers go. And there's, so there's a little bit of resentment. And so now you have the resentment, and then you have a kid who's odd. So it's compounding factors of the fact that she's taking out her frustration on this kid who's basically keeping her from getting laid. And
she's pretty fucked.
And so that's where that's where that Oedipus complex kind of came in, was that they were their companionship. I don't think that there was a sexual nature to it, but there was definitely that each other had in the world. And that's why Norman did what he did when that was removed from his world and she started dating, I can't remember the character's name, but
Joe.
Joe. Yeah.
Uncle
Joe.
Yeah. And it was really interesting to read the chapter where they describe what happens when you get poisoned by strychnine.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And how they're sitting there suffocating while Norman's watching from the kitchen door. It's insane. And of course they changed it for the movie. They made it. Yeah. Well, that was the other thing I wanted to talk about was the violence in the book is really violent. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Norma doesn't come in and just like poke Mary with the thing. He cuts her head off.
I know. I didn't notice that.
I was like cheering at that point. I was like, "Oh man, this is some gore right here." I was like, "Cut her head off."
So that's a trap. It's not to cut through.
It's like, no, but I mean, it sounded like he just one swipe, and the head was gone, and the torso was like there in the shower. It's like I called up Keith. I texted him and go, Keith. I go, I didn't know her head got cut off. I go, I've read the book. I go, I cut his head off.
Well, I had a much different image. The image that went through my head was that he was sitting there like sawing that thing off. Like he didn't stop until the head came off. And so that
like versus one swoop or whatever to like,
yeah, I was like, whoa.
Well, wasn't it supposed to be a fast scene? The first scene?
No, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, if you look at the movie, it is a slower pace because it's almost like there's multiple entry points.
I'll give you that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's never actually, there's never a moment. I mean, obviously, like the film in that time was definitely not going into the realm that we went into, say, in the 70s and 80s. So everything that you see there is all tricks. I mean, the knife never actually enters her skin. It kind of like taps her, but never goes in. The only blood you ever see is like blood dripping into the drain. It's a very low gore scene, but it's the amount of cuts. It's gory in the fact that all cuts, like it's so quickly cut and it's so fastly paced in that moment, even though it feels like you're still frozen in that moment.
Like I don't know how many different
the
cuts.
movie. It's like 52 cuts.
Body double.
Yeah,
they even had a body double. It took so long to make that the shower scene.
Yeah, but it
was pretty in depth.
I mean, the interesting analogy about cutting the head off is it's quite interesting considering that this interloper enters Norman's world where Norman's mom takes off, and actually, to be honest, it's Norma that actually kills Mary Crane in Norman's body, and
rage.
And it makes you kind of wonder why cut the head off, why go to that extreme, and what's the idea behind that sort of thing? Because I mean, there's killing somebody and then there's killing somebody, and she just killed somebody.
Do you think that was a later
77 camera angles?
Oh, that's right. Do you think it was an influence from when he went back and kind of gave it the Geen treatment, when it was just like he read that and kind of got, because he put those elements towards the end and he mentions that in the ending, but is it something that you think that from the details when they came out from that case, he kind of went back and went, oh, maybe it might be something in there. That'd be
I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's just a violent brushstroke, right? Because you're here, you're reading, I don't know, I think it's how many pages into it. It was 160 pages into it.
Right.
That it's sort of like you were on a road trip, and then you get to the hotel and, she's eating dinner with him, and you slightly feel something's wrong and he's acting a little awkward. Don't talk about his mom because he went off on her, and I would never put her into a home. You're evil,
That would be kind
a violent brushstroke. Like, we just turned a corner here, folks, and that was an intentional. But don't you
think that'd be kind of awkward? Just like, oh yeah, I've just got some cold cuts in my refrigerator. Would you like to have some? And a big glass of milk. It's just like, no, I don't want a glass of milk at my side of serial killer. I mean,
well, milk was the thing in the 50s.
Yeah,
milk was a big hit.
I also just think he's just something that she did not see intimidating. She was just like, oh, look at this little sad, stumpy guy. Like, he just, and she also, remember, I think she does mention like, oh, look at him. He's so shy. That's kind of cute. Like, he pulls, like, he doesn't want to touch me. That's so cute, Whereas most women nowadays would be like, no, there's something wrong.
But another thing you got to remember that milk and sandwiches is a significant sign of wholesomeness.
Yeah,
it's down home.
You would read that into it.
Well, that's what it is.
In the 50s,
it is, yeah,
totally.
Yeah, and even now, kids drink milk. Adults don't drink milk. Kids drink milk. I mean, as far as cutting off of the head, I mean, in a criminal psychology story, when a serial killer would cut off the head, it's basically would do something sexual with the head. But and then what they would do, a lot of times, like if you look at Jeffrey Dahmer, people like Ted Bundy, or Ed Kemp would cut off the head as well. But I mean, for like Ed Kemp, basically, he would cut off the head and shove the larynx down the garbage disposal because of it. He did it to his mother because his mother would always nag at him. Where other ones would do it for sexual
Are these people you know?
but from a
so this makes me just want to watch season 2 of Mindhunter that much more. I'm like, when is that coming out?
Well, Ed Kemp would actually, cut off the heads and then use them for sexual devices. That's what he did.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Dahmer, on the other hand, would boil the heads and then put them on and pray to them later on, and he would eat them because he's going against that whole tribal thing about taking in their souls and taking in their abilities. But Jeffrey Dahmer never actually meant to kill anybody. He basically wanted no one to leave him, so he tried to drill into their brains in order to keep them. But
he was actually handsome for a serial killer. He was kind of hot, actually.
But
it's really sad that he was a serial killer.
But I think the significance, now the thing is, I think that the significance of the head cutting off, I mean, criminal psychology has actually moved on, and psychology has moved on quite a lot since when this book was written. And basically, it might be symbolizes the simple fact that Marion is a threat to the head of the household.
Right.
Head of the household, cutting off the head, removes the head of the household, so therefore Mama can still be there at the head.
Exactly.
I think the reason why it's so violent is that Mama wants to make sure that no one's going to take her place. Because I think that she felt threatened in the relationship between her and Mary Crane. Yes, schooling did me very, very well. Everyone learned to kill somebody for a criminal psychiatry course. Yes.
I did psychology in college.
From a publishing standpoint, I wonder if he also put that in there because in the 50s or the late 50s, early 60s, when you read someone got their head cut off, I think that they would have a much more public and bigger
visceral reaction.
Visceral reaction from that. I mean, that's a big shock. I mean, reading that in a book like that is a big shock.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm reading Psycho 2, written by Robert Bloch at the moment, and it's quite interesting to see that this book was 1950s, 1959, and then you have 1982 when Robert Bloch writes Psycho 2, and the violence is
it's a huge gap.
Off the hook.
Well, the violence is quite interesting because there's a lot of suggested violence in Robert Bloch, even when he's cutting off her head and stuff like this. You fill in a lot of the blanks. But now, I mean, basically, he's written in the 80s. Of course, we have Richard Lyman and all the other pulp 80s horror writers at that time coming through, where things are a lot more violent, a lot more visceral, and it's he's raping the nun, and he's actually you feel every single blow that he's doing, and it's like his whole writing style changed. It's like to actually. Probably to compete in the 1980s horror world that came out with a lot of the pulp horror novels that were coming out that time.
Well, that's when all your biggest hitters came out, though. You had, was it Nightmare on Elm Street came out? Was it that late 90s, early 90s?
Well, no, that's 84.
That was 84.
Yeah, I was going to say 84.
And there was Friday the 13th and all that. I just remember Friday the 13th because I hate eyeballs. I just remember going and watching the one that was like in 3D, and I was just like, God, no eyeballs.
I literally did rewatch that with friends. I was like, I love that.
I do anything but the eyeballs.
but another thing in 1980s horror publishing at that time, things were a lot more graphic as far as books go, and they pushed that envelope, and everyone was pushing that envelope. Clive Barker came out around that time. I said Richard Lehman came out, Sean Hudson, all these big time horror writers came out at that time, and everything was a lot more violent. In 1950s. There was violence in books, whether you read, the French book on Les Diaboliques and stuff like that. There is violence, but it is written differently. It's a bit more classy. I guess. So.
Well, your violence with a side dish of attraction on the side, where it isn't so nasty, but it's nasty, but it sounds better, I guess.
I think it's interesting in the book. They don't really say he had more than just those two victims, right? Because it doesn't, like in the movie, they definitely say it could be much more.
There were two more.
People that died.
They refer to two other people, I think.
Well,
I thought that was more in the movie than it was in the book.
It was. But I think they referred to the book too.
They said, "Weren't there two missing girls?" And he's like, "Yeah, we'll investigate that." Meaning, as a psychologist, it's like this is a pattern here, and I think that's part of that.
That's
I think there are better ways to be buried.
Psycho prequel.
Yeah.
Wow.
The one where no one gets away with it.
There you go. Yeah. There's something for you to think on.
But
actually, that would be kind of a cool thing to see the first transition of it. You know what I mean? Because there had to be a first time, and that would have been interesting to see.
And again, watch Bates, because it's just so good. It's so good. It's a total of 5, but the episodes are short.
Okay.
There's 11 episodes, I think, per season, so it's not a 22
half-hour or hour series.
Hour.
Hour.
40
Yeah.
minutes.
Well, 45
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was network, so
Just know that season 2 and 3, it almost turns a little Twin Peaks-esque because it revolves around how the town affects them, and it's not, to me, it's like it veers away, but then it quickly comes back, and they almost do like kind of like a nod to like, you know, to the fans. We're not doing that again, and they kind of just focus on the relationship between Norman and Norma.
Twin Peaks came out in the 80s. I was in college. I was going with my girlfriends and go, you could have watched this fucking show. I go, this is the weirdest series I've ever seen. Like, Twin Peaks takes the gold as far as weird goes. I don't know. Before or since, I still haven't seen anything so weird.
Well, again, the town in itself in this story is a character, right? And you have to kind of, nuance what makes the town even odd, so that way you kind of place this odd character and his mother in the town. So,
I mean,
I'm going to watch it now. I keep seeing like Bates Hotel. It's like, I need to get addicted to a series.
It's great.
I mean, the reason why Robert Bloch wrote Psycho, because basically he wanted to say that what would happen if your neighbor was a monster living next door to you. That's the whole premise of the reason why he wrote Psycho.
Yeah.
Living in a small town.
Right.
And then it was funny that he grew up next to Ed Gein.
Yeah.
Oh, he did.
It was like 35 miles, right, from where he lived. Yeah.
So, but but I think the body count in the book for Psycho, I think it's only the 4. There's Norma, Joe Chambers, Mary, and Abergast. So, and
me and Keith knew a Psycho. Like, was it? We knew Arthur Shawcross when we were kids.
Yes, he was a
talk about a psycho serial killer. What do you have, like maybe 60 people under his belt that we're not quite sure about?
Yeah. Well, I was telling you, even like the movie Go Town, the movie The Changeling, I watched that movie, and at the end it's like, the town was called Wineville, but now it's Mariloma, and I was like, holy shit, that was where I was from. And it was literally like a mile from where I lived. I was like, oh God, like the chicken coop killings. Oh, it was horrible. Oof, that was bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is we're not quite sure what starts, if Mary is the first victim or not. So it would have been. I mean, the thing about the book is very concise. It's very short book.
Right.
Basically, there's nothing.
Quick read.
Yeah, it's a quick read. It gives you a lot of information within that reading, but it is very fast paced. Mm-hmm. And it'd be quite interesting. I know that I'm reading the sequel that Robert Bloch wrote, because wondering if they actually alludes more to Mother, but at the moment it just seems to be having sex with his mother due to the women that he's killing, because he actually does go after Lila, and Lila and Sam are now married, which is quite interesting.
That's what I figured. I knew that was
which makes sense. I mean, it totally makes some sense.
Well, yeah. She's so much more mousy and so much more laid back, and that's what he wants. He doesn't need.
But there was that chemistry with them that once he started to listen to her, he was like, oh, you know what? And then he found that she was tenacious. Even when he said, go get the sheriff, and she didn't do that, it was like, she disobeyed you, and he was like, probably turned him on. Oh, great. She figured it out more than I can,
I thought it was quite interesting in the book that Lila and Mary look a lot alike. I think that a little bit more.
Yeah, because doesn't Sam call her, or no, who calls her?
Well, when she first appears, he thinks he's when Lila first appears to Sam, he thinks at first that it's Mary until he sees that her hair is slightly different, darker. Yeah. When Lila meets Norman Bates the first time, he thinks it's Mary coming back from the grave, until he realizes that her hair is slightly darker, she's slightly shorter, but apparently they're very much alike, which I think adds something. I mean, once we get to the movie, it would have been quite interesting if they could have made Vera Miles and Janet Leigh look slightly more together.
Yeah.
It was kind of there. It was kind of there.
I like that the scene where before Mary gets into the shower and she's sort of living on this elation of deciding to do the right thing. And there's a comment where she says something about feeling 7 feet tall. First I thought, I'm like, wait, she's 7 foot tall? What? and then I was like, oh wait, I'm reading this wrong. I like that there is this elation in her that like she's going to do the right thing, and no matter what, it's all going to turn out right.
Take the money back and everything.
Yeah, and then it just... it just doesn't.
That got convoluted and fucked because she didn't get a chance to do the right thing. Yeah. She ended up in...
Then she got her head chopped off, and it was like, oh...
get up in the
I
swamp.
find what's very, very interesting is that Lila and Mary are kind of cut from the same cloth to a certain extent, that they're both are very strong-willed women who tend to act before they think. And
Correct.
I mean, Mary did. I mean, the whole thing about stealing the $40,000 was acting without thinking, and not actually thinking things through about,
Well, 40 grand was a lot for back then. It was like,
well, she also wanted to stick it to that creepy, like, Texan, whatever, the guy.
what a douche canoe that guy was.
I'm gonna buy my daughter a house for $40,000. Hey, honey,
Yeah, they really creeped him up in the movie.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But I think that, I mean, what's interesting though, that it also shows how Sam and Mary are not really compatible, to a certain fact that she would think that Sam, being who he is, that the $40,000 that he would just take, and and you find out that Sam wouldn't actually taken the money. If anything, it probably would have broke them up.
Probably.
Well, it wasn't she trying to negotiate in her head how she was going to play it out, right?
She was going to make up some brilliant story about what was the story again?
That's a relative left it
As
to
like
her.
an inheritance, right?
But but with Sam's character, even if it was an inheritance, he was never going to take the money from Mary, because he's not that kind of man. He's a man that supports his wife. He's not a man whose wife's going to support him. And
I don't know. First read it too when he's on the cruise with her, or when she's talking about being on the cruise with him, and he tells her the story. I was like, oh my god, is he like kind of like a gold digger? Like he's just playing her, like, hey, I'm kind of hard up. I don't have no. I immediately, my mind went to that place where he's like, oh, is he trying to get money out? Then when you meet him, you're kind of like, okay, no, it's not that angle. But my mind went there, like, oh, he's trying to get some money out of her,
Well, I found what's quite interesting is that all the characters are black and are all gray. All the characters, Norman's a gray character, Mary's a gray character, Lila's a gray character. There's always something. It's not all completely black and white. Where Sam is black and white. Everything's just good or bad. There's no in between.
Yeah.
And and he's one of these kind of weird hero types that doesn't actually do anything heroic except at the very end.
Yeah.
But
he seems like a total waste of space and oxygen, really, actually, to me, as far as a woman goes. It's like, that is not what I would go for. I mean, he just doesn't, he's just there. He doesn't.
Well, I also just didn't know why he didn't have motivation. There was like Layla was the one who was like trying to getting him to move. Like, I need you to move. And then it was like, then what's his name? Abergast? Yeah, Abergast. So it came, and then it was like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe we should. And I was like, what is it? Just like, you just don't want to listen to her? Like, and the guy comes, and so then he's like, well, let's just wait on what he says. And she's kind of like, seriously? Like, why can't we just go? Well, no, let's wait till he comes back. And then he doesn't come back, and he's like, well, let me go find out. And I'm like, what the hell? Yeah.
But the thing is, I think it's very telling with the scene between Lila and Sam in the book, where they're waiting for the phone call from Abergast, and Sam talks about time and the town and the sounds that you hear are different at night, and what happens on the weekends at Fairview, how the sounds are different. That's his life. That's it. He's not a worldly person. The only reason why he was on that cruise is not because he wanted to see the world, because he won a trip.
Yeah.
And he tried to trade it in for money.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
True. Yeah, that's right.
And Sam,
that's why I thought it was like a twist, because when she even asked him that, like, oh, how did you get this trip? And because I thought it was like, oh, is he playing her?
But Sam is the one character that's steadfast and true. That's it. Yeah. He's a provider. I mean, to be honest, if you were married, I'm not sure if you got married to Sam, would you have an exciting life? Well, you probably have someone who would do right from wrong. That's it. He's just steadfast provider.
Right.
I mean, the thing that we don't know also is that, Mary lives in a city. Mary grew up in a city. Sam lives in a sleepy town. So we're not even sure what kind of relationship if Mary lived, and let's sit there and say that, these people go off, they probably would be divorced within 5 to 10 years, because they're two different worlds here, which is, I think that it also makes you think that there's a lot of stuff in the book that Sam's basically doubting his relationship with Mary, not just the simple fact that, she's running off to see him, but there's like things that he doesn't know. He doesn't understand. He hasn't thought this relationship through. It's a summer romance. He hasn't thought through. That's Sam. And
well, interesting too, you could tell the sister is sort of in the same perception as Mary, because at one point she's just like, what kind of hick town is this? Like, like literally the sheriff is just like, we got a bank robbery over here. We got to focus on this. She's just like, what the hell?
I know. I did love I did love the sheriff. It's a sheriff as well.
Yeah. He's kind of a bumbling idiot.
This Tulsa, is it not Tulsa?
Well, the funny thing about the whole thing is like, which is missing from the film, but it's like there's this whole burglary that went on that he's busy with that, and then it's like, oh, Norman's just Norman sort of thing. He's more interested in the burglary that's happening. That they're going to catch these robbers.
Yeah.
There wasn't even in their jurisdiction, I don't think. I think he was just like, oh my God, there's some excitement in the town over. I'm going to go join,
Yeah, exactly. That's what my perception was that too. He's like, oh, look, something finally is going on. Let's go investigate it.
Who cares about a missing girl? I got two bank robbers on the street. I'm just doing that. So, well, I guess, is there anything else anyone would like to discuss about the books before we go to our commercial break and go into the film Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock?
Nope. I loved it. I thought it was a great book. I'm glad I read it.
Yeah, I'm very glad that I read the book, and now I'm like John. Now I kind of want to go and read 2. Or Keith, you're reading 2 now. Who's reading 2?
I'm reading 2.
All right, I'm definitely like, now that you kind of talked about it, and I was doing a little bit of research too. I was like, oh wow, that's a crazy story. I kind of want to read this now.
But what I would highly suggest, if you're going to carry on reading the Norman Bates one, read Chet Williams's Psycho Sanitarium.
Yeah, I want to do the whole
about 2 years ago, and I wrote a glowing review. It's fantastic. It really sets the stage of what the Norman, the Sanitarium years.
So should we read the second one, then that one, then skip what's the other one?
Psycho House?
Yeah.
Psycho House, Norman is missing out of Psycho House. It's almost like Robert Bloch. I won't carry on, but Norman Bates's ending wasn't able to go into the next sequel, but I think he just wanted to capitalize on the Psycho name, and so it all takes place at the Psycho House, but though there's no Norman in it. So, but Psycho Sanitarium by Chet Williamson is probably the one that you should read next, then Psycho 2, or you can just skip to Psycho 2 and read Psycho Sanitarium as a afterthought sort of thing. Okay. But it is interesting. It's a lot more gory, a lot more graphic, and it has that real 80s horror feel, novelistic feel to it. It's almost like Richard Lehman did it. If you ever read Richard Lehman, it's like a lot of gratuitous violence and gratuitous sex. Well, before we go any further, what we're going to do is going to cut to a commercial break, and then we're going to return to discuss Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock, directed by Alfred Hitchcock and written by Joseph Stefano. And so please stay tuned.
Amazon is here to make your life easier. By just the tap of a button, you can turn the camera on your phone to your own personal shopping list. Introducing Flow. Just tap the camera icon under the search bar, and you can find whatever it is you're looking for, right on Amazon. Faster than scanning a barcode and typing the name of your item into the search engine. Besides, searching with words is so 2012. Save time and money. Amazon, where shopping meets effortless.
Here we have a quiet little motel, when in fact it has now become known as the scene of the crime.
You have a vacancy?
Oh, we have 12 vacancies.
You know, this is the first place that looks like it's hiding from the world.
I think that we're all in our private traps, clamped in them. And none of us can ever get out.
Is anyone at home? Oh, that must be my mother.
Is anything wrong?
Am I acting as if there's something wrong?
She's not missing so much as she's run away.
Put me down. Mother! Oh, God! Mother!
What are you running away from?
She looked like a wrong one to you?
It's not as if she were a maniac. She just goes a little mad sometimes.
She wouldn't even harm a fly.
Let's play a game. I will ask you yes or no questions. Ready? Do you have a rocking chair to relax on? Do you have space to store your toddler's toys if an unexpected guest came over? Can you lay down comfortably on your couch? If your answer is no to one or more of these questions, then you need the new IKEA catalog. Visit IKEA at Cairo Festival City and get your free copy. Enjoy 1,000 new ideas and more than 2,000 new lower prices. IKEA 2018 catalog. Make room for life.
IKEA. Welcome back. Now we're going to be discussing Psycho, written by Vincent Spano, the screenplay, and the film was directed by Alfred Hitchcock. So, John, what's your thoughts on the movie Psycho?
For a movie that had a budget of $806,000 in making $50 million, that's just crazy. I mean, for that, especially for that time. I saw the film when I was about 14, I think. And it really made me fall in love with the big screen. It was really my breaking of the third wall, if you will. I wanted to know more, not just about the actors, but I also just wanted to know more about the director and then the screenwriter and how it all kind of came together, such synchronicity. Needless to say, like for me, that was really life-changing as a viewer from myself as an artist or a writer. It challenged me to kind of review what I thought was good cinema because, this was the mother, pun intended, of all thrillers, in my opinion. So it kind of made me go back and sort of challenge me to kind of look at, other cinema masterpieces that I viewed.
The Catholic Legion of Decency gave the film a B rating, meaning morally objectionable.
And it's weird because, like you said, as you mentioned earlier, Vicky, is like rated R, and you can only assume that it was because of her wearing the bra and taking the bra off, and more like nudity versus violence, because there wasn't any penetrating of the knife or blood. Like that's why he actually, I think, made it in black and white, because he didn't want that violence to kind of carry through that way to block him.
Well, after Vicky told me that it was rated R, I know that in the UK it's got M for mature audiences only, but I found out the reason why it was given as R is not due to the violence or to the bra. It had to do because they showed a toilet for the very first time.
Oh, stop it.
No, God, I was true.
If it's brown, flush it down.
I mean,
that'd be great. Yeah.
What's quite funny about Psycho is that when Alfred Hitchcock decided he wanted to do a movie, he's seen a lot of low budget black and white films that were doing very, very well. But he always thought that he could add something to this. But what is quite interesting, at the same time that Psycho came out, a person named William Castle was making films where the 13 Ghosts and Mr. Right. And films like that, and they always had a gimmick. And I thought it was quite cool that Alfred Hitchcock put a gimmick into Psycho, where basically you couldn't go in, you had to be there at the beginning of the film, you couldn't go into the end, you can't tell anyone the ending of the film.
Yeah.
And I quite think that's it shows that Alfred Hitchcock basically took his hats off to these low budget filmmakers and gave them a bit of kudos by doing
he
so.
always had his cameo appearance.
He also like made the critics go with the general public touch, because he didn't want them to ruin it for anyone. So he was like, "Nope, you got to wait for everyone else."
Well, they think the reason why that when Psycho first came out that it did get bad reviews, which were later taken away, considering how great a film was, because the critics were pissed off basically because they didn't get an advanced screening. Normally critics would go to a screening room with their secretaries and sit there and watch the film, in the leisure of their own private space. And he took that away from them, which, a lot of people think that the reason why I did get bad reviews because the critics are like, how dare you do this? We're special. We don't need to be seen it with the public.
Right.
I mean, it's one of those films that's quite bizarre because you do have a really good cast where there's Anthony Perkins, Vera Miles, John Gavin, Martin Balsam, and Janet Leigh. And no matter what they did before or did after, Psycho is always going to be them sort of thing. And it kind of made their careers, but kind of ended their careers at the same time. It's one of those weird films. I mean, Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins. I mean, he was on a very, very good road to a really decent career. I mean, he did lots of films, got really good notices. He was doing musicals and plays on Broadway. And then after Psycho, unfortunately, his career
got stereotyped and roped into it.
Yeah, it kind of went down to a downturn. And if you look at Janet Leigh, Janet Leigh was doing, musicals, My Sister Eileen before this. He did Manchurian Candidate with John Frankenheimer, and her career was going. And after Psycho came out, that was it for her. And Vera Miles, the same thing.
Vera Miles are two John Wayne films for the most part.
I would say though, Janet Leigh, like she loved Hitchcock, because even I was watching a documentary and she just speaks so highly of him. And you could say, especially if your career goes downhill, you could be like, well, this guy, I thought it, but she clearly knew what he, trusted him and knew what he was doing and tried to, follow his.
Depending on the actress, because a lot of people didn't really give him big kudos like that. They said he was kind of like the old man.
Well, the funny thing about all this sort of stuff, as far as Alfred Hitchcock is concerned, is that you can tell how great a director is because all these stories came out after, especially now with the Me Too situation going on.
Right.
Any further on that, but if he was this kind of lecherous, horrible man, why did he always have the same actors and actresses working with him time and time again? Sort of thing. He was very respected. And I think what anyone can say about Alfred Hitchcock is like, he's probably the only director that is synonymous with, that's been copied over and over. Steven Spielberg would not have a career without Alfred Hitchcock. Brian De Palma, of course, would not have a career without Alfred Hitchcock. If you look at modern films like The Inside Man by Spike Lee, there's a lot of Hitchcockian moments of the way he directs. He actually changed the world of cinema as we know it.
Yeah.
And to this day, even Martin Scorsese, he'll sit there and say that if it wasn't for Alfred Hitchcock, his films will not have the look that they have.
If it wasn't for Alfred Hitchcock, the opening of Never Hike Alone would not be what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's nice.
For me, like one of the biggest things about this movie is not only what Hitchcock did, but the way that he uses Bernard Herrmann's scores. And the opening of Never Hike Alone was based on Vertigo.
Oh, wow.
The whole dynamic of it, the way it goes up and down. One of my favorite classes that I took in college was music and cinema, and we studied the scene in Psycho where Janet Leigh is driving the car, and we watched that scene with no music, and then you watch the scene with music. Mm-hmm. And when you watch that scene with music and the way it goes in and out in the scene, like when she has a moment calm, and then the moment she gets back on the road, and like, and you're watching it, and like I hadn't watched it in a long time before I had watched this, before I got ready for this podcast. I went back and read the book, and then I rewatched the movie, and I was watching it, and I remembered being in class, and I was like, wow, yeah, this is still impactful. And I understood because I was pulling from that while I was creating Never Hike Alone. And I was like, I know that like the music can carry this scene. And even though we're just watching a Bronco drive out into the wilderness, this music is what's really going to sell this opening. And even though there's nothing that really scary happens for a little while, that will kind of give people it will start to get people on the edge of their seat and the music of it. So that was one thing that as far as this movie is an influence on me as a director and a filmmaker, like the film, we can get into the camera and we'll get into the storytelling of it but the music in this film is just, it's one of the most iconic scores of all time anyway, but the use of it and the way it's in there and when it comes in is so masterfully done. And it's kind of like the last thing that tips you over the edge in this film, being what you see visually. It's the music. It's just that.
The cellos and islands, and it was just like an unheard of piece of a score back then.
It starts out really strong, like sharp and strong. And when I was watching it, I rewatched it yesterday. I turned it on and I kind of just went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, and it's like, and it literally scared the shit out of me. I was like, oh my God. And then I was like, I forgot how quickly it just like jolts you. And that's brilliant because to me, it's like most movies lull you into it. You get the scenery and it's very soft. And, like he wanted to just shock you. Mm-hmm. And then immediately you're jolted right back out of that into sort of a serene environment to where you then, see a couple in a hotel room. So it kind of, it's jaunting, it's jolting you into these directions. And like like Vincent said, the music definitely sets you into that moment of when you're in the car with her, when it's daytime versus nighttime and it's raining, and it just puts you on that edge. It puts you on that, in that space where you just feel uncomfortable.
Well,
Bernard Herrmann, 26
title sequence.
Yeah.
You know, that's the crazy thing. It's like it's music over graphics, Saul Bass graphics of just like, and it's really simple, but you're sitting there and you're like, whoa, what am I getting into?
Yeah, what's happening? What's going on?
I mean,
you stepped on your go.
Bernard Herrmann is a genius. I mean, you know, if you look at, you know, without Psychos, with Bernard Herrmann doing Psycho, you probably wouldn't have Jaws soundtrack. You wouldn't have some.
Yeah.
I mean, even in Star Wars, you remember in the Maltese Falcon part where the stormtroopers come into the Maltese Falcon and they're hiding underneath underneath the floor, and they comes out, and when they come out, it's actually Bernard Herrmann's Psycho score that they use, those 3 notes.
Yeah.
And you know, it's used so oftenly. I mean, Pino Donaggio, who did, you know, the scores for Carrie and Carrie and Blowout. You can tell that he's very much influenced by Bernard Herrmann's score for Psycho. I mean, you know, Bernard Herrmann pretty much set the, you know, if you look at any horror film today, it's pretty much, you can nod to Bernard Herrmann, the way horror scores are used in films, even in modern day today.
Especially Insidious. Like Insidious does that with the really sharp moments, you know, and it does jolt you versus like the typical jump scare where you turn around and, you know, it's just the music that jolts you. You're like, oh.
Well, even if you listen to like Friday the 13th, the original scores and the subsequent sequels, I mean, it's a nod to Bernard Herrmann. Halloween is a nod towards Bernard Herrmann's score. You know, they're done with synthesizers, but I'm sure if they had the budget, they would have used a string quartet. So,
yeah,
that's what I want. I wanted to do that. We almost had a string quartet we actually did. We had a small little string quartet. We had a violinist, a viola, and what's the other one? And a cello. So we had that. We actually did live recordings of that for some of the pieces. But one of the original things that we were thinking about doing was going overseas and having an orchestra do that score.
That's cool.
We ran out of time and money.
Yeah. I was going to say, that'd be a little bit of a session there to bring it all.
Yeah, it was going to be like in Prague or something. We were going to sit in a room at like 3 a.m. out in LA and watch them do it. And he's going to do it maybe in the future.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that Robert Bloch did not make much money off of Psycho. But it did build his career to a certain extent, that he did work with Alfred Hitchcock a lot in the Alfred Hitchcock television show. He wrote a lot of episodes for that. So it shows that, you know, Robert Bloch, as far as his career goes, he wasn't driven by money. I think he was driven by the infamous name that his name would have due to Psycho. And it just shows that, I don't know, Alfred Hitchcock really, you know, basically changed the world of cinema. And I think that Psycho, I mean, I got it on Blu-ray, and I watched it on Blu-ray last night. And most black and white films are a bit flat looking, but
they are.
But Psycho is not flat looking at all. It looks very 3-dimensional for a black and white film. It's a very 3-dimensional look to the film.
Especially the windows when she's in the room, and then, you know, he opens the windows to let air in, but then you kind of see the house and how it's offset in the argument between Norman and Norma, which, by the way, I didn't realize. I was reading, there's 3 people who voiced Norma. And I was like, why? Why were there so many? Like, why? There were some lines in there, but there wasn't that many lines. But like, I'm curious.
What cracks me up about the house is I went to Universal Studios some years ago, and that house is just like, it's like
tiny.
Size of my table. I mean, it's set off to the side, and I'm just like going,
it's brilliant though, because you think it's this massive, menacing thing, and then you walk up to it, and you're like, oh, it's tiny.
Yeah, it doesn't even look like, you know, what you would think it would look like, but that's Universal Studios. I love that place.
They did. I think that they did tear it down, unfortunately.
No, it was still up, I think.
Oh.
I think the last time I went was 2013. It was still there. It was still in the lot.
But I think it's
it was right behind the Back to the Future tower clock.
In Vancouver is where they did Bates Motel, and they built the whole house. And they said part of it was like, it was sad to see it go, but like the people in the community were like, "Oh, thank God you're tearing this thing down," because it was like this huge, built like massive model of the house, you know, and it just menacing, you know.
Well, it was menacing looking in the film for, you know, even though it was just like I said, it was the size of my kitchen. And you wouldn't know it. I mean, it was bigger than that. But I mean, it was just really teeny tiny. And then, you know, having visited, you know, Universal Studios a couple times, you see it, it's just like, oh, that's the Psycho house. And it's like right behind the lot where they did Back to the Future. It always cracks me up because they got the town clock thing.
Yeah.
And that they use that for everything. You know how many movies they've used that for? Like, I don't know how many, but quite a few actually.
Everything gets so used. It's hilarious. I was shooting something a couple of weeks ago when I was working on that show, and we were in front of the Lethal Weapon house.
Really?
Yeah, and somebody just casually goes, "Hey, they shot Lethal Weapon right there, right?" And I was like, because it was on a back lot at Warner Brothers, and I was like, "Oh yeah,
yeah."
And we're actually holding background in the Lethal Weapon house. So I was just like walking around being like, "Hey, where's that bathroom where Donnie Glover?"
Yeah,
we're taking
the toilet.
You literally have like trivia for that. Be like, so what in the background was used in a former film?
I don't know. Yeah, it might be in the film. It might be on the show. I'll have to see. I'll have to see the angles.
Well, I'm gonna have to look that up now. That's gonna annoy me because I really
they always reuse stuff. I mean, if you look at the Munsters house in the 1960s TV series, The Munsters, that's actually Bree's house from Desperate Housewives. It's the same.
Oh,
house.
That's right. Yeah.
And if you look at yes, it is.
Haven from Friday the 13th was using a ton of. Oh no, the Higgins Haven and the Jarvis house were both using a ton of stuff too.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, burnt down, and Jarvis is kind of gone. Actually, Jarvis house was just used in This Is Us.
Mm-hmm.
Was it? No way.
Yeah, so there's a wedding scene. I don't watch This Is Us, but apparently there was a wedding scene, and in the background, that's the Jarvis house.
Oh, that's so interesting.
That's on the property, yeah. Because I went and visited the property, and they were telling us, "Oh yeah, This Is Us was just here," and I was like laughing, like, "Oh, this is hilarious."
What state are you in?
Los Angeles. I'm in Los Angeles.
You're in LA. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of homes out there that you see that you're like, oh, that was in this, I was in this. The Murder House. That's an American Horror Story.
I mean, they even do.
I can't wait for the new American Horror Story. I'm really psyched for the new American Horror Story. Coven meets Murder House. Yay!
I mean, it's quite interesting. Even like TV shows do it a lot. I mean, if you're a fan of Bewitched, that same neighborhood is Partridge Family. Same houses, same same.
I agree with Jeannie too.
Yeah,
a lot of them they just take the lots and they just turn them into the new neighborhoods, with Cereal Lane or whatever.
Well, if you look at Bewitched and Watch Partridge Family, they didn't even bother moving the houses around.
No,
houses.
Fuck it. That's true.
So next door to the Partridges was Gladys Klavitz. So that must have been interesting. So as far as the film goes with Psycho, Vincent, what did you make of the way that it was, the characters and everything of Psycho?
Well, I mean, Psycho is just it's a staple. I mean, it's just one of those films that, as soon as I saw this on the list, I was like, oh, this is easy. I got to talk about this one because it's such a big influence for anyone who's a horror filmmaker. Alfred Hitchcock is such a masterful director. The characters of the film, which I thought was pretty funny, and we kind of touched a little bit about it before, was the first thing that changed for me after reading the book and seeing it was how hypersexualized it became, like opening up with the white bra scene, two lovers meeting in the hotel. It really changed the dynamic of that relationship between Sam and Marion. And I was, and it was funny watching it a second time after reading the book. I was like, whoa, this is way different. I never really realized how different this was. And then putting it in the context of the 50s and the 60s about the sexual revolution that was about to come. So I could imagine that Hitchcock using this as probably a social topic of discussion that was probably going on at this time and using it at the forefront to really push audiences. And I imagine that's probably one of the reasons why he didn't get great ratings right away, is because he was pushing against the moral norm of, the way society was in America in the late 50s, early 60s. Going from there, and obviously the other big character change is Norman. Going from a portly, kind of odd-looking man who can kind of be seen as not intimidating, but also I think there's something about that type of character type as like a portly, odd-looking guy is the guy you're kind of like, all right, this guy's weird. The inviting nature of Norman in the film is what makes Psycho. I mean, Anthony Bates coming out and just the wholesome young boy. Would you like a glass of milk, ma'am? And
it was kind of hot in a weird way.
Yeah.
Oh no, definitely. Yeah, very dapper.
Very dapper.
I would have picked him up.
Yeah.
There was also no level of, like, to me, any awkwardness to him. He was very, like, to me, almost very a little bit too put together, because I think now that I have the context of the Norman from the book versus this, almost like it's a little bit unbelievable that he would go and just flip like this. I wish there was a little bit of a little nervousness to him, to awkwardness to him, to be able to
Right.
pan into that.
He is a little bumbly. I mean, he is kind of like he's kind of like almost like a Disney character in a way, like, geez, kind of that. But oh yeah, all of a sudden this is
you betcha.
But like, it's that scene where they're sitting down and they're having that conversation about we all go a little mad sometimes. It's just a great performance. The way that dials in and the way it slowly turns. And he doesn't, it's funny because he's more wholesome than the character that's in the book. He's also not as crazy as the character in the book, because when Norman's spying on Marion through the hole in the wall, it's very tame. In the book, he's this bitch, and I can't believe she's doing this. And, I was reading it like, wow, like Norman's really screwed up. And in this one, it's that slow temptation. And they really play on the fact that, the temptation of a woman compared to the personality of the mother that's in the back of his head, and kind of getting it to there. I thought that was cool. Another character relationship that I really liked in this was the way that, obviously in the book, you're able to do these scenes where you're not seeing what's on screen. And so Norman having conversation with his mother where he won't look at her, he can't look at her, and, kind of playing that red herring in that way. In this one, it was cool to see, now look at it again and see that like everything is from a third person perspective. So you hear the mother yelling from the house, constantly see her yelling or hear her yelling from the house. You see her pass by the window, obviously that it's Norman cross-dressing and stuff like that.
Right.
Another thing is, I never, until now, because this is something that's come up in social in our time now that's being pushed, but the fact that like there's a lot of mention of transgender in film, which I imagine again was a big shock for people in the 50s.
Oh, that probably totally blew their minds back then.
Yeah, and it's something I didn't really think of when I watched it in college and I watched it growing up. It was not something that I wasn't hypersensitive to it. Now I was sensitive to it. Like, wow, like I didn't realize, because I think we all kind of grew up during an age where, to us, it was just, we don't care.
Yeah.
It's like, whatever. What you think? Yeah, all right. Dress however you want. So, but knowing that kind of cultural side of it too was like, wow, this is actually very progressive in the fact that it's talking about something that people at that time didn't understand at all. I mean, not at all. And talking about it from a psychological perspective, and that's a good analogy, a good point, because I've never really even thought of that as being progressive, especially with like cross-dressing and stuff. That was unheard of. I mean, how many times you see John Wayne where someone had a dress on? Yeah, right.
I mean, that's a very good point.
Or it was meant as more of a comedic beat and not maybe that far back, but like as it got into like 70s and 80s, it was more like
Tootsie.
Tootsie, or what was the show? It was some buddies, like it was like meant to be very comedic, not thriller, which is very interesting.
Well, it's funny that you brought that up, Vincent, because I was watching the documentary in the making of this, and Vincent Spano, whenever they thought there was going to be a problem with the censors, Alfred Hitchcock goes, "It's your script, you talk to the censors." And when it came to the censors, the word transvestite came up, and they said you can't use that word because
I read that.
And basically, Vincent Spano goes, "It's a word," and they had to go to a dictionary. All the censors had to read what transvestitism, because they were going to ban the film for using the word transvestite, or you had to cut that word out.
Right. Which
is quite interesting. We're considering that, what they thought it was. But the censors are like normal Americans, and I guess they thought transvestite has to do with sex.
Yeah.
They thought it was a sexual term that they were trying to like throw under the carpet and then throw in the movie to be deviant.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wondered. I was actually sitting there like, wow, I wonder how this impacted at that time, because it must have been hot. But I mean, if they're worried about a toilet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, it really did impact them, and they did get to the point where he had the fight to use the word transvestite because they thought it had something to do with abnormal sex. That's what they thought. So obviously,
and again, I guess maybe mine and Keith's generation are a little more jaded than your average generation because we've seen it all. So, but I mean, I can't even imagine a toilet. I mean, we take pictures of kids sitting on the toilet, standing on the toilet.
I mean, but you also go back to a time when it was like two women. I mean, a man and a woman couldn't sleep in the same bed, so they had the two separate beds.
I love Lucy. Remember that?
Yeah.
The single bed.
Bewitched, I think, was like that too, right?
Yeah. No, wait. Were they?
At one point they were like that.
No, wait, that was the Brady Bunch where they were in the same.
Oh, Brady Bunch, that's what it was. Yeah.
The Brady Bunch didn't even have a toilet, so I don't know what those people did.
No, wait, there is no toilet. a bathroom there, but there's no John.
I mean, I was gonna say that, and with that many kids, that's a problem. I'm just saying.
You've never seen a toilet in the
family
Big old
without
sandbox out in the backyard they can just crawl into.
Explains the AstroTurf. So,
Oh yeah.
Sack race. Oh, now we understand the sack race hole.
They were just really water conscious. They knew the drought was coming in California, so they were like, you know what, maybe.
Yeah, we're not having a drought in Dallas.
I mean, another thing that Psycho showed that I don't think you ever actually saw in cinema before this is premarital sex. Because that they were meeting up in a hotel room. And
they banged it out. I mean, it was pretty much the afterglow of.
And
that was the afterglow. The bra, him and his no socks on with his trousers.
And she's like, I gotta go, and he's like, no, just stay. I'm like, oh, he's ready for round 2.
And you got to remember, this is like 16 years before Afternoon Delight as well. So, I mean, she's out supposed to be having lunch. I mean, you see her sandwich sitting there.
Well, it's interesting. Again, you pick a character like that too, that is having premarital sex, and it's almost like, again, once she gets killed, it's like the punishment of stealing and premarital sex, and and then you'd mentioned
sort of like with the Friday the 13th and the Freddy Krueger movies and all that. The teenagers who have sex are always the first ones.
Oh, it's a trope. It's a common trope.
They always get it because of the sinning.
Yeah.
But I think that, it must have been quite racy at the time. I mean, the thing is, and you got to look at Marion Clarence. She's changed her name to Marilyn Claring now. But, it's quite racy. They obviously meet for sex quite frequently. It is mentioned in the script, which must have been my
right.
And then she goes off. Then she goes off to work. And the thing is, it's like, because going meeting each other for sex is quite common for them.
He's a dog in that first scene. He's like,
I know.
What did you say? Like, she's like, maybe you can come by and you can meet my. Did she say you can eat dinner at my mother's house? He's like, and then after we can bang. And after always takes it like right there. Like,
but she didn't. She just like putting my on like. It's like she's like, I gotta go to work.
Straight to work. All sexed up. Just.
I'm I have to say though. I have to say, she was on point. That woman, she is stunning.
Well, it's quite telling as far as Sam Loomis's character is concerned, but maybe this was just a sexual relationship for him, that she thought it was something more.
Yeah.
He just wants to have sex, because he even sits there and goes, when she does sit there and say that thing that, this is where the mother thing comes up over and over again in the film. It's like, I'll make a steak with my sister and a picture of my mom on the mantelpiece. And, and then he says, of course, what you just said, that we'll bang afterwards. But
Typical man.
We'll have dessert afterwards.
And, the thing is, he's ready for another go. When she has to go, I have to go to work. He's like, well, can't you stay and we have a go at it again? And it's like, no. Right. I got to go back to work.
And then if I recall, he does say something kind of sincere to her, like, you are more than just a bang. Like, I forget what he alludes to, and she kind of smirks and then goes out.
Well, I think the most romantic thing that he does is later on when he starts to write those letters. And I think that was a nice callback I thought that was a really nice callback to the book, and I thought that was a really sincere, is that you actually see his sincerity in that, because he's doing that. I think one other thing that separates the film from the book is the fact that even though we do set them up and they're hot lovers, and was he a divorcee in the book?
He was divorced in the movie.
In the movie, not in the book.
But he wasn't in the book. Okay, that's right. That's what I thought. I didn't think he was. I just know that he was down on his luck with his dad's shot. So that was kind of like, that was also, divorce. They throw that and bump that one in.
That's in the late 50s. Oh my God.
Well, divorce. Divorce, because he would mention alimony. He didn't mention having kids or anything like that, right? No.
Okay. What he was hoping for was that he's paying the alimony for his wife, because at that time alimony was quite high. They didn't have any kids, but he was hoping that his ex-wife would get married, so he no longer had alimony, so he wouldn't have that financial obligation.
Right.
Yeah. And that was all hinging on that. Mm-hmm. I think another reason making him a divorcee would probably help explain the sexual freedom that he had as well. I think if he was not married, had two people not married before and meeting for sex, probably wouldn't have been as palatable as it is for a divorcee to be having sex. But that doesn't talk about Marilyn Crane character, because she's never been married. So, what you got, it's okay.
God forbid a woman wants to get laid.
Well, I mean, it kind of
they don't cover the fact that in her previous, like what her life has been like, the fact that like she's had to take the place of her mother.
They just make it sound like she just taking care of her sister, though. She really did seem like she
they didn't go
had
too far into it.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah, they don't. That's what's kind of the brilliance is they don't. You kind of get these two characters that are really unfinished characters that you don't know anything about, and you're plopped into the situation with them, and you don't get much time to know that much about them. Maybe more Sam because he carries out throughout the story, but definitely, Maureen, like you don't get in. You know. It's one and done, and that's it. That's all you get to know about her,
But I also think that they're two characters that the youth of that time would instantly like understand. I think that there's a budding, the people that are going to go see those films, like people who are in their like late teens, early 20s, early 30s, like again, like life was much shorter back then too. So life was happening much faster. People were getting married out of college, and then you were doing this, and so I think that there was a sense of, as old as Hitchcock was when he was making these films, he had an understanding of the younger generation. And this was the younger generation's plight. So when they went to the theater and they saw a divorcee and they saw a young woman who was trying to connect with somebody and doing premarital sex and obviously we're on the verge of a sexual revolution here. Yeah. By the time the film comes out, they instantly connected with those characters, and they didn't need the long backstory. They just understood who they were right out of the gate. And that's, that's for an audience in 1960.
Anything pre-60s at that point would have been a major sell because everybody was thinking about it. But everybody was doing it. No one was talking about it.
If that movie was made prior to then, you probably wouldn't have had those characters that way. They would have censored all of that, and they would have been very proper and court you.
But the funny thing about Alfred Hitchcock and when dealt with sex is that he always found a way for them to have sex symbolically, like North by Northwest. It's like they're making it, and the train goes into the tunnel. And he always had like a way of doing that, so it's quite interesting. This way, I think
film where Cary Grant, he's walking around in the robe too, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And he's like, Alfred Hitchcock would show that they're having sex, but he would do it like in a symbolic, pictorial way. But I think this is probably the first time he did it blatantly, which is quite an interesting thing. Now, what I also like about Psycho is what I always liked about Alfred Hitchcock films is the way that he put these small character actors in these roles that just lifted it up, whether it was Thelma Ritter in Rear Window. But I always loved that he put Pat Hitchcock in film. She's always wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
She's not Sofia Coppola. I mean, this girl can act, and she's actually.
Yeah, please don't even get me going on Sofia Coppola again. It's just like every time I think about her,
agree with you so much.
Performance in The Godfather.
Well, who is it? Wasn't it Chaplin who said, that there were four hands in the creation of Hitchcock movies? It was like, him, his wife, like she was just always, it's inspiring to have a power couple that way that she kind of gave approval on everything before, he actually went with it.
Well, she was his film editor back in Silent Film Types, because, as you know, Alfred Hitchcock started in 1919 with his career sort of thing, filming between 1919 and 1921. Can't quite remember the exact date, but he did silent films, and she was his film editor, and she was his film editor quite a while, actually. And she's the one that would she when she watched a film, she didn't watch the film, she would watch it by film strips, because she's so used to looking through like the old machine when they would edit. So she see it from cell to cell to cell to cell to cell, and that's how she looked at films. So she would catch things. But what I love about Pat Hitchcock's character in this is that she talks about the tranquilizers with her mother. And Alfred Hitchcock always had like this little minute characters, and even the guy who brought in the 40,000, they always had like these just character actor sort of things that only main actors can't really do this. I don't know why, but character actors can always take a small part and just make it something. And he always did that. And I thought that scene where she's in the office. And that whole scene there is it's just a magical film. Most means like, okay, the film's gotten dead. Okay, I'm bored now. But it's not like that at all. It just he keeps just adding layers and layers and layers.
Even the sheriff that when she sleeps on the side of the road and he's sort of menacing, you never see his eyes because he always has the glasses on. I just love that character because it's just annoying and you want to just go away. And then she goes to take the car to exchange for another car, and he's there again. It's such a menacing feeling, but I love that character. He didn't have that many lines, it was just to kind of provoke her and move her, and it worked. you know.
I've seen the film a ton of times, and it's been a while, but when I was watching that, it's kind of, I had this like thought in my head. I was like, oh, this is the feeling of like after you've smoked a joint, you start driving, and then you look at your back mirror and you see
oh God, oh no,
like, oh my God, there's a cop there. I forgot Herman's score come in. I was like, I wanted to make a meme. Like, this is what it's like.
when she's watching the review, and you're like, wait, cop drift off to the background. She's like,
but I was so like, I was actually physically tense watching that scene because I totally forgot how just menacing he is with the, the mirrored glasses, and kind of reminded me of Cool Hand Luke in a way. Like they kind of have that scene, so I was like, wow, this is like, it's just a better appreciation. It's like one of those things. It's like, as you get older, I think you start to appreciate more and more things. You start to pick up more and more things as you watch films, because you understand as an adult, something that's meant for you as an adult. You pick up things when you're, a teenager, an adolescent, a kid, even a young adult. Certain aspects of the film will stand out to you. And so as an adult, and now as a filmmaker, when I went back and watched it after kind of learning from it and then doing some of my own things and then going back and like kind of relearning again. And then going like, wow, like now that I've been through this process and understand what he would have to go through to do these things, like if we want to jump into it, the scene where where Janet Leigh falls out of the tub and you're doing that slow pullback, and it's got to, knowing that she's laying there alive, having to stare straight, and she almost gets through the entire take, and then her eye just flitches.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Well, they said they tried to get her contacts, and I guess it takes like 6 months to get used to them, because back then the contacts are not as sophisticated as they are now. And so she said they were going to try to do that, and then he just said, well, you just got to make it work, and he also had told her, you have to follow the camera. And she had mentioned in this documentary, that most actors have a problem because it sort of breaks them of their character. And she just said she thought of it as more of a motivation. So when you now rewatch that and you think about that, every time she moved, it was a camera moving. So she had to be ready. So like whether you're packing or you're putting something away, the moment that camera moved, you have to move with the camera. And it's so brilliant, like I just love that. Like the whole, now that I know that from a perception, I go and I watch it and I'm like, oh my God, that's really brilliant,
I now I'm gonna have to replay that. That's gonna be annoying because I did move, and I was like,
like when it's in the car in the parking lot, when it moves. Yeah.
Twitch of the death nerve right there.
It was a death nerve. That's what.
After that sequence there with the shower where she's there, the thing is, it was supposed to be a bit longer. But what happened is she caught a breath, and Elma caught it, and it's like that's the reason why it kind of cuts to the shower and then cuts back. Because there's part where she had to go. But she was also saying that last. I think that they did numerous takes on that because there's always something going on. She's twitching or dripping.
Well, and they had to get the water like looks like a tear which came down, so it's kind of like they let that set. But I'm sure there was like water on her face, and it rolls over your eye. You're gonna inadvertently do that.
Well, there's one scene that they did cut out of the film. Basically, they did do an overhead shot where you saw her bum and she's there, and they cut Alfred Hitchcock cut that not because of censors, because it just made it more horrible to see this naked woman there just bleeding.
Well, it also kind of in a way sexualizes it in some ways because it's versus they talk about that too in the documentary where when they lay down the shower curtain and they're laying her down and how they're trying to determine how to fold it and cover the body. And he deliberately was like, well, we're just going to do it this way. And he walked out, Alfred Hitchcock walked out and said, well, this is a camera angle and this is how we're going to shoot it. And I guess the moment when they're doing this, they're so into the scene talking about it, the screenwriter, the producer, and Hitchcock. The wife comes like flinging this door open and it scared the hell out of all of them. And so they kind of use that as that scene when, showering, all of a sudden behind her, the door just comes open and you're like, oh God, like what's going to happen here?
I mean, I think, taking Marion Crane in the film, I mean, she is a very bad thief. I mean,
she sucks. Talk about guilt and whatever else. I mean, she can't cover her tracks for shit. It's just like, if I was going to steal that amount of money, what is it, $350,000 of the gate to our century or whatever? It was 40,000, but it would have been like almost 350,000 if it was like
today,
now. But she sucked the guilt. I mean, it's just the cop alone. I mean, if I was the cop, I would have just hounded her too.
But at least like she was a good accountant, because it seemed like at one point she started to log how much money she was spending. She's like, oh, $700 for the car, $150 for the hotel. Like she was writing it all down.
I mean, I think that Janet Leigh's an odd choice for me. I think she's brilliant in this film. I'm not taking anything away from her, but there's always a hardness to Janet Leigh. I mean, if you've seen her Manchurian Candidate, there's something always a bit hard about her. And that's why I found that I think she's brilliant as Marion Crane, but she's not an easy character to like, really. And
true, yeah.
And because there's a steelness about her, and she's quite hard.
Digger, that's why.
Well, I don't think it's because of her character. I just think I think her acting's always been, she's quite steely with it. Almost like an Ice Maiden sort of portrayal that Janet Leigh portrays. And I mean, I've seen quite a few Janet Leigh films over the years. And outside of a couple where she's like the girl next door, she always plays these kind of hard characters.
Yeah. And sometimes with the hard characters, you have to, you can't be so focused into the acting because your emotions tend to be more focused on trying to deliver versus allowing there to be some sort of vulnerability to connect from the audience standpoint with that character. So maybe that's just it.
I mean, but she does pull off a mean bullet bra. I'll give her that.
I mean, I can't imagine having to wear one of those things. That just looks like an Iron Maiden. It's like a fight. I mean, why would anybody want all that fucking rubber crawling up their back? I mean, this is it these days, we don't wear that shit.
And it's interesting.
Wear that shit back
it's
then?
Interesting they go from the white to the black, and it's sort of that, she was preparing to see her man. She's like, I got my black laces on.
I did notice that she had the little, the things, the spacers in the back.
Yeah.
So I guess that was sexy for back then,
Well, they had the costume designer, because Alfred Hitchcock was very, very much involved in every single, when he filmed something, he was very, very much in every single little minute detail. And part of it was the brassiere thing. And he wanted to do a white one because at the beginning she's pure and innocent of soul, I suppose we should say here. And then when she steals, of course, out comes the black bra, Oh,
I didn't even notice that. You're right.
And it's a symbolism that now she's gone bad, so now she's wearing black, because black is always considered like the more sexier, the more, the darkness.
But then the shower is a cleansing moment, right? Where she's cleansing that away and she's washing away, the bad, if well.
She was all happy and shit, and then he comes in with a knife. All over.
She was singing in the shower. He just couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah,
What the fuck?
If I got to hear Let It Go one more time, I'm just going to die.
Tiny bubbles. Ah!
I do have to sit there and say that every time, after I used to see Psycho when I was younger, and I would jump in the shower, I always kind of wondered, I've never actually taken a shower and had so much bliss on my face when taking a shower before.
I had bliss on my face. Up till this morning, I never had much bliss on my
I have to
face.
say, too, I wonder how many people were traumatized. I mean, because I know, again, I watched this when I was 14. That feeling of
being watched.
Being watched and being alone in a space. And for some reason, the bathroom holds a more obsidious sort of nature to it. So when you go into the bathroom, you feel like you immediately have to shut the door and lock it because you're afraid something is going to come in and get you. I wonder if that movie had a lot to do with that feeling.
Not in my house. Everybody just keeps the door open. There's just no filters in my house.
Well, I mean, the thing about the bathroom, though, is probably that where you're at your most vulnerable. Whether it's
It is. When you're in the bathtub.
Mid body functions or
using your imaginary toilet.
But what I always found funny is that with the bathroom, when you look at cinema, and let's say you do have a killer, that they always tend to run to the bathroom in the most vulnerable.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Sort of thing. But I mean, I think the bathroom is when you're at your most vulnerable. If you're in the bathroom, you're normally in the middle of something, whether it's a shower.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sort of like when the Spectrum guy keeps coming to the door and knocking on my door for the last 3 days while I'm in the shower. I'm going to kill that motherfucker. It's like, stop knocking on my door.
But, I do think that, I think that's what also is, as he said before, it's a way for Marion Crane to, wash herself and cleanse herself of her sins as well at the same time. But it is what we're near her most vulnerable.
Yeah.
Well, I think she made that decision at that point where she was doing the account and stuff. She was going to make this right. I don't know how I'm going to make it right, but I think that she just come to that decision. She just gets to that decision of goodness, and it has to be taken away in such a violent.
Her decision of goodness didn't come on its own. It's Norman who actually helped her come to that decision.
Yeah. He did.
And what was quite nice in the film is that you do get Norman Bates and Marion Crane have a really nice moment together. I think that the only time, what causes the demise of Marion was the simple fact is, like, when she asked him, would you think about leaving here? Would you think about having a brand new life, starting afresh? And that's what sparked off the mother complex issue. It's like, oh my God, Norman's going to leave me, sort of thing, which then when mother takes over. So it's not so much that, it's not the sexualization because, while she's showering, I think that kind of adds to it. But I think it's basically at that point in the film where, she talks about, Norman talks about life in general and then not, and then she comes up to the decision that, that I'm not going to settle. I need to make things right. And it's because of her conversation with Norman. If she never met Norman, chances are she probably would never tried to make things right. She wouldn't have added up her numbers and cleansed herself of her soul. She would have carried on going, with her plan. It's Norman that makes her realize that.
And there's something about, that even it translates in the book as well, that she sees in a very odd way, she sees something of herself in him. And there's a level of empathy because maybe she took care of her mother and she doesn't want him to go down that path where, maybe this could lead him to doing drastic things. Because what really pushes that is a statement of, we all go mad sometime. And that is a trigger for her. Like, what am I doing? Like, I'm going crazy. Why am I doing this? And it brings her back. So maybe those words of wisdom is her way of saying, you don't have to go mad. You don't have to settle for this. You can actually have a better life for yourself. So don't settle on what you're doing here for your mom. Like, go out and have a life. Cause this is after, she hears her mother, like, yelling at him and she's just like, this bitch. Like, she's like,
Yeah.
But Norman and Marion are both trapped in their lives. They're trapped. Yeah. And, and Marion's looking for a way out. And I think, in the book, I think Norman's more looking for a way out. It's kind of hard to tell in the film whether he's looking for a way out or not. But, unfortunately, with Norman in the book, there's a lot more of a childlike quality with him, whether it's him eating candy corn, when you first meet Norman and that kind of thing. But I think it was quite that scene between Norman and Marion is probably what makes Norman a lot more sympathetic, which actually, by the time you get to the end of the film, when you realize what he's, when you actually put everything together, if it wasn't for that scene between Marion and Norman, I don't think you would be as sympathetic towards Norman.
That's true.
Because I think deep down inside, if Norman had a different life or things were slightly different, he probably would have been quite a nice guy, sort of thing. He probably, would have been like, a useful member of society or whatever. Because he was a nice person. He's one, but then again, if you look at the whole serial killer thing, what's the first thing anyone says about a serial killer? They were quiet, they were nice, you know, the perfect neighbor sort of thing. The woman does fit into that categorization of a serial killer, though he's not in this instance as far as films, because Norman is not a serial killer, sort of thing. When you come into, what we know as a serial killer or a mass murderer.
Or it's like the fly comes into the trap, right? If there's no one that comes around him, they're safe. But the moment they come near him, it becomes, jeopardized.
I personally think that if Marion didn't have that sandwich and didn't say what she said about, leaving his mother and starting a new life, that Marion probably would have walked away and just gone back home. And
I agree.
That conversation actually stirs it. It's not so much the looking in the peephole sort of thing. I think that gives that starts it a little bit, but it's mainly that conversation that starts the whole situation.
The one thing is, I wish there was more of what was in the book, which wasn't in the film as much, was the Norman exposition of what his life was like, because it was reliant on, the I want to say they were in the courthouse or the prison or wherever the heck they were at, and it was a psychiatrist like relaying all that information to everyone. Like, well, he just told me all of this. So let me just tell you. And like, I was kind of like, I wish it was actually Norman kind of working through that and like, expelling that information.
I think that when you look at the film sequels, not the book sequels, but the film sequels, Cycle 2, Cycle 3, and Cycle 4, the beginning. Yeah, I mean, they kind of gone in a weird direction with that, with Olivia Hussey playing the mother. First of all, you got this Olivia Hussey is sexy. I mean, she's sex on a stick sort of thing. She's very pretty. And then she kind of has sex with Norman in the way that the Hollywood version wanted to go forward with the fourth sequel. So they tried to flesh out the whole mother situation, but I don't think they really did a very good job at that, because then if you kind of watch the beginning and then watch Psycho, it kind of makes it like, you know what I mean? It's just kind of like, it just makes it a bit more screwed up than what I think it needed to be. But I think that Hollywood, just when they decided to run off of the sequels and try to explain Norman Bates' beginnings, I think that they put in a lot of stuff that probably didn't need to be in there. And I think that sometimes when they do a reinvention story, that sometimes they do that.
And that wasn't that the one where it was actually he was getting married or he was with someone and then he kept having flashbacks out of his childhood, and it was sort of like, no, you can't marry me because I'm really fucked up or I'm really crazy, and then here's why.
He's talking to a talk show radio. I mean, I'm sure if they remade that movie today, he'd probably be on, Dr. Phil talking about his life instead.
or Facebook. Everyone, I'm going live. So when I was a kid, my mom, actually thought she was in my head.
Or Maury Povich.
Maury.
Before you go on to kill somebody else, we're going to give you a makeover. Yay! Yay! Before we return you back to your miserable life. So, but so I think that was, as far as Anthony Perkins' portrayal of Norman Bates, I don't think anyone could ever do it better.
Yeah, I agree.
But then we get, then after the shower, the thing about Psycho, the shower sequence itself has spurred, like, I think 2 movies about the making of the shower sequence. There was one out last year. And then, which is quite interesting. And of course, Hitchcock, which is about the making of Psycho, which was up for a couple Academy Awards. But then we come into like Vera Miles coming into it, and she's quite an interesting character in herself, in the film version and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I thought that Vera Miles is excellent in it, but as I said before, or what you said before, I kind of wish there was more Norman backstory that you got with the book that you don't really get in the film.
Yeah, but you never usually do, though.
No, but I mean, you have to gain a certain level of trust, and I think you get that from that one scene where he's with her, having that discussion, and they kind of have this realization together. So you kind of build it within that one scene, whereas the book, you kind of get little snippets of his personality because it's coming from him directly,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think obviously you have that first scene in the book and you don't have it in the film, but I think that also is the reason why they do that is when you first meet Norman, you want to believe that he's normal. You want to believe that this is just an everyday, motel that.
You want to believe that he's not going to act as pretty blonde, yeah.
Yeah. There's that. You don't want to believe it.
Yeah.
You know what the movie's about. You know what you're going there to see. You know what's going to happen, but you still have that like, oh, maybe he won't do it. And it's like, oh, he's too nice. But then again, it's like going on perceptive fears. I mean, how many people at that time were driving cross country and staying in little roadside motels and wondering, is that guy behind the desk like a real creep?
Probably more people than we probably get credit for, because I imagine people were doing that kind of thing. Because, like I said, everybody was doing it, talking about it. Not that everybody.
I think
it was so easy to get lost back then too.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't have GPS; you had to learn how to read a map.
And apparently, in that town, no one really cared if you're lost. Anyways, they're like, "Oh, whatever, they'll turn up. It's fine."
Yeah.
I think also, as you know. As we discussed here, that a book and film are 2 different mediums, and it's, a book you can go into a person's mind more and get things more fleshed out. And a film is a bit harder to do that unless you do that really cheap thing where you have like voiceover, like they do in soap operas. It's like, oh,
right.
You know, the person sitting there and it's like they're talking in their head, but it's being a voiceover. And then which would kind of cheapen the effect really of a film sort of thing.
Right, it does.
The scene where she's driving, I was going to ask you guys this. I'm glad I just remembered. And she's, in my opinion, I'm thinking it's in her head. Like she thinks that's what's going on. Like she's hearing the voices of her boss and the guy, and then she's continuing to drive. Or do you think that was like actual events playing out, overlapping with her?
The actual that was probably going on second to her driving. I kind of figured this is what's going on, and it's probably going through her head that this is probably what's going on because they knew she took the money.
Yeah,
and she pretty much screwed the pooch, you know.
I love when she like sees him too, and she's like, "Oh God," she's like, "Gotta go."
And he like waves to her, and then he's like, "Wait a second," and then she. Yeah, but I think that is definitely what happened. She was just predicting what was going to happen, and by the time we pick up with our characters after that, we know that's it's not that exact thing. Something very similar happened because that's what everyone understands. The money's missing. My favorite thing in the entire line, that entire little sequence, is when the creepy Texan's like, and she was flirting with me.
I know. Oh my God.
After being the biggest creep, and then he turns it around on her. I'm like, yeah, that was a great character moment right there.
There's nothing that's changed in Texas since 1959.
But I do think that if I know when I can reflect back to when I was a child and I did something wrong, and you know, it's like you've done something wrong and your parents know and you're headed back home and you know that your parents are going to face you with whatever you did wrong. You do play scenarios back in your head, how it's going to go and what you're going to say, and I think it's a lot to do with that as well. Which I think was quite clever to actually add that in there, actually, because
that's just human nature.
Yeah, it showed her a sign of a paranoia. Look, if anyone stole money or stole something, of course you can have that paranoia in your head, like, oh my God, you know, what's going to happen? When am I going to get arrested? Like, and then the police officer just plays more into that, you know, once he comes into it.
Well, he has to have the glasses and the big pores on his face, and just look like your typical ticker cop. That's just going to stand there and lord over you in your car, you know.
But I also love how she's not really ladylike there either, because he challenges her and she's like, "Look, I just fell asleep. I was tired. Can I go?" she's not at all like, "Oh, so sorry, officer. I fell asleep." She's just like, "What do you want? I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. I'm busy." You know.
I have to say, I haven't fallen asleep in my car, but I've been pulled over by a cop in Virginia. And to be honest, I was going 90 miles per hour in a 30 mile per hour zone because I wanted to get to the beach. It's a long story, but I won't go into that. But when the cop pulled me over, I mean, they're shiny. You know, it's like everything's like perfectly pressed, and they come to your door.
Yeah.
And this is on. They ask you, and you just gonna. I mean, every time I see a cop, even today, I've never been in trouble, thank God. But they do make you feel a bit intimidated. There's always
of course.
There's always that fear that you've done something wrong. When I walk past a cop in the street in London, it's like sometimes I don't want to make eye contact in case they think I did something wrong. It's just like
I know, but you call cops in London bobbies. I can't get anybody that Bobby. Why do they call them bobbies?
Because Vicky, we speak English language properly. You massacre it, so just let us do what we do. But yeah. So what I also liked about Psycho, going back to the cop thing as well, is like when she's at the car lot and you got this, the cop's not saying anything, he's just standing there staring at her.
Yeah, intimidating her, trying to intimidate her, you know.
Which kind of reminds me of like Halloween a bit, with when Michael Myers is just standing there looking at Laurie Strode, and every time he gets that, not doing anything, just staring, sort of thing.
But here's my thing: is like, so then he pulls over, he comes around her,
he follows
and then
her.
but then he kind of like. He gets out, and then she rushes in her car. Why wouldn't he have said something like, it just was weird. Like that part was weird. If he stayed across,
why are you suddenly changing your car and driving away like a mad person? Yeah, he kind of just all of a sudden let that go. Like, he was so intense about following her, and then she buys a new car, runs away.
She almost forgets her luggage. Like, she's done.
She was a bad crook. She really was.
Well, I think the reasoning behind that basically is that because no one's known she's taken the money yet, and I don't think, though she's acting suspicious, she really hasn't done anything. She hasn't broken any laws, probably. I think
not at that point.
Well, I mean, not to anyone. No, I mean, because she does trade. I mean, she does act nervous. I mean, she does try to drive off without her suitcase, without the money, I guess, and her bag. And yeah, it is circumspect. And I kind of thought of that sequence, the simple fact that because the cop pulls in and talks to the car dealership, and I think that because the car is in her name, that's probably the reason why. Maybe they didn't pursue it further. I'm guessing, filling in blanks, but we're probably.
Well, but I can't remember if it was him or the guy the dealer, who is, by the way, a jerk, who was like, I'm having a bad day. And I was like, really? That's how you approach someone? And then I think, well.
She has a strong arm and to be giving him $700 for the car.
No, but basically he just throws a number on. She's like, okay. And he goes, oh, like he thought, no, she's not going to have this money. She's not going to be able to afford this. But I can't remember if it was him who asked if she had the papers or if it was the police officer.
I mean, there is some circumspect here as far as all that goes, going back to what Vincent said. I mean, the thing is, she does pay cash, $700.
Yeah,
cash.
That's a lot of money for back then.
Yeah, that's like $7,000 in cash.
Well, let's put it this way. If you're walking around with $700 in your pocket at the moment, it's a bit circumspect even today. I'm sorry, but who walks around with $700 in their wallet?
I don't. They tell the truth.
So... But it's quite interesting. But yeah, I do kind of wonder why he didn't actually pursue her even further, or maybe he just couldn't be bothered.
Or he had to just stay there and investigate what she left behind too, because you kind of have to then make a choice: you stay there or you follow her.
Or maybe he started to follow her and there was a donut shop on the way and he had to stop.
He's like, I wonder what she's. Ooh, donuts.
We don't butcher the. How do you say we butcher the English language? How do we know you weren't butchering it? Okay.
You literally just came back. That was a conversation like 5 minutes ago.
Really, now I always have things in the back of my head where Keith's concerned.
But I think I do think the film. I found the film quite odd because you had like this whole build up and then you get Marion Crane's murder, that's all fantastic. But then the end of it seems quite rushed, I found, which is quite interesting.
It was, but except for the one thing I didn't really, I don't know, I guess I found it rather annoying is that how they had the psychologist explaining Norman Bates' conversation to him about how mother took over at the end. I guess maybe I wanted to bitch slap that actor. I don't know why he annoyed me, but I kind of wanted more from Norman and not from the psychologist.
I think
very 50s, very, very early cinema, that scene. The complete, just a dialogue, all right, now we're going to explain what you just watched. And like
he was very forthcoming there with all that information. Like, how did you get all that out of him?
Well, I mean, we covered The Bad Seed as well. They did the same thing in The Bad Seed. Who
made all those movies with like the string on the friggin' flying saucers and stuff? Was it Ed Wood? Ed Wood, yeah. Ed Wood, yeah. That's what it reminded me of, was an Ed Wood movie at the ending. That's why it annoyed me at the end.
I think what happened is because you need an explanation, and I think, at the time that Vincent Spano, was his name Vincent Spano? The guy who wrote it, wrote the screenplay. He was doing a lot of, he was going to a psychiatrist at the time, and I think he added that in because that was part of his Freudian healing
philosophy
with his mother. Well, he had a lot of issues with his mother apparently, and then and which actually probably made him a perfect candidate for the screenplay for Psycho. But I think they added that bit in because I think you needed a bit of an explanation to why. Now, the problem with the 1950s psychiatry compared to today's psychiatry, things have moved forward, and the explanation of Norman and the reason why he took off his mother's personality is not quite right in today's standards. You can go along with it in the film and stuff like this. If you want to pick the film apart, you have to look at it as a film of its time. Nowadays, it's like, a son taking over the role of his mother doesn't really happen that way. As we learned, like let's take Ed Gein, for instance. Ed Gein dressed up in women's skin because he actually was a transvestite, and his mom was highly religious, and his mom wasn't talking to him. When he dressed up in women's skin, the reason why he chose larger women that looked like his mother because they were the skins that fit him. It had nothing to do with him trying to be his mother.
That sounds more like Buffalo
Well, that's what it based a little bit, like slightly, right? Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill.
A guy gave birth to Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Silence of the Lambs. So, and I think that in the 1950s psychiatry that, this seemed like the perfect solution, the reason why Norman was the way that he was. Now, but we know nowadays in psychiatry that if you're going to have a split personality, whether it's, Sybil or whatever like that, normally it would be because as a child you would have a situation that would happen in your life that would basically would split your personality, but it had to be hugely traumatic. And that would split your personality, and that other personality would come to your rescue and take care of. Well, like if you're a child of abuse or something like this, and so you're heavily sexually or physically abused by a parent, sometimes, and in very traumatic ways, your personality can split, and then you would have like a figure that would take over to cope with the pain. And then, then something else happens that could split again, and so on and so forth. So I think that when you're looking at the psychiatry of Norman Bates in the 1950s setting, this was quite a simple and easy to, tie everything up into a bow situation. As I said before, modern psychiatry is totally different now. It's looked at differently. Your personality is split, which it would be quite interesting to take modern psychiatry and put it back into psycho and say that something horribly traumatic happened. But then we do have something horribly traumatic that he killed his mother and killed his mom's boyfriend. But I'm not quite sure that would actually split your personality to that certain degree. Yeah. In the book, it does do a little bit better that we learned that once that happened, that Norman went into a catatonic state. Mm-hmm. But in the movie, we don't get the catatonic state that he was hospitalized and then went back to the house.
Right.
Another thing in the book is that Norman Bates is older. The killings between his mother and Norman are 20 years. And it was 20 years ago when he killed his mother and her boyfriend. In the movie, it's 10 years. So that actually a totally different thing. There's a lot of difference with a lot of solitude in 10 years and solitude of 20 years as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's so at the end with this, it's like the psychological analysis of Norman, it is very much of this time period of 1959 psychoanalysis at that time.
Yeah.
The world has moved on with criminal psychiatry and stuff like this. And with the invent of serial killers and understanding serial killers and mass murderers, the world is more progressive. There's more understanding of why these things occur than you did in 1960.
Right.
Exactly.
Good point. So,
but I do think that the end sequence, and I never realized this, and I watched the making of on the Blu-ray disc, and rewatching it, I noticed it again. I just noticed it for the first time that when Norman does that thing, I wouldn't even hurt to fly at the very end. And did you ever notice there's a very subliminal, his mom's face is there before they cut to the car?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I never noticed.
I was going to say that kind of like makes up for like the whole scene. I think that like we're talking about if Norman had kind of explained this, where we had seen where he's trying to explain this to the investigator, I think what pays that scene off is kind of like, boring as it can be because it's just an explanation. I think that, again, we've gone through this film, and if you don't know the context or you haven't seen it before, you're wondering what the hell's going on. And you get this very interesting story, especially for this time and in that time, of what's going on. They talk about him being a transvestite. They talk about him or being cross-dressed and the split personality and all those things, which aren't common knowledge in that time of day. But what kind of goes in there is then it goes into the voice of the mother. So now you've had this established, and it's kind of like this, we call it like a story medicine. It's like you're taking your story medicine. This isn't really a very interesting scene. It's not visually interesting. It's not, the subject matter's there. And as long as that guy can deliver the information in an interesting way, it's palpable. But what pays that scene off is that moment where you're hearing Norma speak to Norman, and you're zooming in on Anthony Perkins, and you got that look on his face, and then that slow little dissolve where they get Norman's face in there and it fades to black, and that's the end of the movie. It's kind of that last haunting moment of she's kind of still out there in a way.
She's lingering,
or not even like, and it just starts to get your brain going. It's like, how many other people like this are out there? How many, and I'm sure, it has its
just on my street alone.
Well, and, not to give much away with Bates, again, they do a very interesting mechanism the same way where it's Norman versus Norman because the reflection is her. So every time you look, you're like, it's Norman. Then you're like, oh, no, it's Norman. No, it's him. No, it's really weird. And how they do it, it's crazy.
Cool.
I mean,
I have to watch that now.
I mean, it'd be quite interesting. I'm sure that some film student or film theologist somewhere along the way has probably done this, but it's quite interesting. It's Norma and Norman. And there probably is some significance there that, I haven't been able to pick up somewhere, but I'm sure that someone's done probably 100-page thesis about this somewhere.
Well, usually, if it's a male too, the masculine to name after the father. So was it like a jab at the dad who left and change his name? Like, you're Norman now. You're not whatever, Chris or,
I mean, what is very interesting is the mother-son dynamics, and you have this. It is daddy's girl is a mama's boy, and you do see. The funny thing about it, you do see sons who are a bit too close to their mother, which and it actually disables them to actually continue with their lives. I work with this person who is 60 some odd years old. He always lived with his mother. His mother did everything for him, to a certain fact that when his mom died, he couldn't even heat up a can of soup.
God.
And it got to the point where someone had to go in and teach him how to take care of himself because his mom did everything, because his world was his mom. I don't even think this person ever dated or had a girlfriend. Yeah. And you do see, I mean, it's going to be quite interesting in modern times now that, with housing and the way things are, the way we are moving forward as a civilization, a society, that more and more kids are leaving home a lot later. And it'd be quite interesting to see if this, this has an effect. But, you do see a lot of sons who basically still live with their mother until a very late age. And that doesn't break away until the mother dies. And then what normally happens after the mother dies, within 5 years, the son dies. There's almost like a marriage. It's this weird kind of marriage. This macabre dance that they do amongst each other. And they never have a girlfriend. The girlfriend's never going to be as good as his mother. And the mother's make sure that she's always there sticking her nose in. And that's pretty much Norman, sort of thing that we come to say. And so,
I like how I was going to say, I like how in the book too, in the film, it's that it's not even a sincere term, but like boy, like she doesn't even call him like Norman. It's like, just, he's a man, but she's like, no, you're a boy, you better listen to me, boy, you better do that. Like it's big.
But we all fall into those constructs, though. I mean, the thing is we're all living on our own. We're all adults. But as soon as you go home and you visit home, you fall back into those old family pathways. Is that, you start fighting, you start talking to your brothers and sisters like you were kids again, adult version of kids, and you fall into those patterns. So if you never leave home, you're never going to break that pattern, sort of thing.
If I ever treated my sons like that, they would bitch slap me. There's no way that just would not happen. I would never treat my kids like that. I just couldn't.
Well, you don't think you treat your kids that way, but we've seen you do treat your kids that way.
I do not treat I don't call my kids boy. Shit. Boy. I don't want them to live with me. I want them to be out of my fucking house. You don't understand.
That's why
I want them gone. They keep coming home.
So,
like, stay gone.
Yeah, but I think, it does. What I quite like about Psycho, though, I like how it does open up your minds and makes you look at things quite differently. It does. I think Psycho is one of the reasons why I did go into criminal psychiatry. I think that's one of the main reasons, watching Psycho and hearing about that and the bad scene.
That you got the mind of a serial killer as well.
So, but I do think that what he says is quite interesting, and it does. It's one of those movies that you do walk away and you do start thinking about it. It stays with you.
Keeps you unsettled. It's a little unsettling.
Especially you're killing. That was really rare for that time. You're killing off who you think is the main actress, and that's even to this day. It's a rarity that you see that happen, where it's like, we're gonna kill this person off. And you're like, wait, what? No. Like, why did you do that? We're kind of liking that person. And
Walking Dead.
Yeah, there you go. So, and that kind of led the pathway for other shows and movies to do the same thing. Kill their little darlings.
Still going to be heartbroken on October 7th. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I've got to get over it. I need therapy.
Hereditary kind of did that to me. Like, you think your movie's going to be about like a person, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, they're gone.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they carried it on. Look at Scream, Drew Barrymore. The way Scream 1, 2, 3, and 4 open up is basically the main character gets killed off first.
Right.
And
You don't have much time to invest in them. Like this, you at least get like an hour and something into the movie. You invest in the character, or a season. I was watching a show called, it was in the UK, Hex, and the first season ends with like literally the main character dying. And you're like, what the hell? So then the next season, you're like, well, how in the heck are they going to do this show? It's like killing off Buffy. It's like, you got used to this whole season. Now she's dead. You're like, oh.
Well, I mean, we've seen what happens with television shows when the main character goes. It's almost like the jumping the shark moment sometimes because you get involved in that.
Shake it up.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So to carry on with it, Vincent, would you like to give us our final thoughts about Psycho?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to that saying Psycho is just a masterpiece of cinema. It's one of the staples of horror cinema. One of the things that definitely got the genre going and pushed it into the 60s and 70s, and is ultimately why we have the films that we have today. I know I wouldn't be the filmmaker I am without Psycho, and it's just it's a great story. And from a film standpoint, it's just a great film. The cinematography is amazing. The score is amazing. The acting is amazing. It's just a top-notch film all around. And I cannot imagine a better film to like kind of get into and study, especially if you're into horror and you're into, criminal psychology or anything like that. I think that it's just, for me, it's just like the perfect film.
And what about yourself, Vicky? What is your thoughts about Psycho?
I just like the old black and whites. I think it adds to it. I know that he was like kind of under $1 million budget when he made it, but he was a brilliant director and filmmaker. And there's only one Alfred Hitchcock. There's not going to be another one like him. And he was like a pioneer for horror. And like us, we all like our scary horror sordid movies with more gore usually, but sometimes you just don't need all the gore to make it a good movie. And it was just a very intense movie. The shower scene, unlike any other before or since. Definitely one for the record books.
And what about yourself, John?
This is the first of many Hitchcock films we will be covering, and I'm very glad we are doing that. But this movie in particular is literally one of my favorites. The suspense that's built through the orchestra, through the camera direction, through the acting and everything. I will just reiterate that to me, it made me look towards cinematography in a way that made me want to look beyond just the acting. I wanted to actually know how the director and the producers actually made the film, and it's done so well, and it isn't two-dimensional in any way, shape, or form. It's very three-dimensional in a lot of ways, and the angling and what they do and how they bring the characters to life. And again, it's like literally one of my favorite movies. Yeah.
Great movie.
As far as for me as Psycho, I think Psycho, if you're interested in film whatsoever, it's one of the ultimate films you need to see. It also, it's the forerunner of, films that we see today, and it's often copied. As you'll note, like our next episode, we'll be doing Homicidal, which is a William Castle film, and Dressed to Kill, which is basically a love letter to Psycho. And then we also will be covering like Frenzy, which is, Alfred Hitchcock taking Psycho and going graphic with it, which is quite interesting. But at the same time, I think that, Psycho is a masterpiece in all, as you said before, in all ways. Whether you're doing script writing, character, composition, music, direction, filming, editing. It's a masterclass in editing on its own. So, yeah, Psycho is one of those films that I hope that the younger generation keeps watching it and keeps it alive. And as far as the book is concerned, I think it's another one of those books that probably needs to be rediscovered and actually adds that new dimension to the film. And it's one of those books that should hopefully keep alive. I mean, I know that a lot of publishers are redoing a lot of these books now, these old books. Whatever happened to Baby Jane's out there now. Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte's out there now. Les Dalles Obliques is all now being republished, all these 1950s classics. And I think Psycho is going to be one of these films that 200 years from now is people will still be loving it and seeing it and looking at it in a whole new light. But it will never lose its potence. So.
Yeah,
I agree.
And now I'm glad I read the book with it too. I mean, I think that the two both. I think
Yeah, it's actually a simple read too. For anyone who is like intimidated by it, it's a really easy read. So
you know what? I was quite shocked because when I was reading Psycho, and I know that Vincent Spano wrote the screenplay, and when I was reading Psycho, I thought to myself, like, he just basically just copied the book. You know, that's what I was thinking. He just copied the book, except for you know, Anthony Perkins, you know, changing Norman Bates' character. And so I was thinking, oh, he's just copied the book. So I'm reading it and I'm really liking it. And I think, okay, you know, it's like a book. It's a little bit more intense. But then when I saw the film, I was like, oh, actually, Vincent Spano didn't copy the book. It's kind of weird how the book and the film are started melting them together. And then when you actually see the film afterwards, you realize, no, Vincent Spano actually did something extra with it, moved it in a different direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I thought that was quite interesting. So, John, do you want to say what we got coming up next month and about our competition and everything?
Sure. Now that Mother's tucked away, sleeping soundly in her room, we mustn't disturb her. But before our literary license listeners check out, might I offer a few amenities you might have missed during your stay. Beyond the swamp mud baths you can take, as well as a valet parking we provide, you can visit our website at llpodcast.com to check out our reviews of books to screens and everything in between. Become a patron, as well as check out our past episodes from Season 1. A special thank you to our returning guest, Vincent DeSanti, for joining us. Can you tell our fans where they can find you?
You can find us www.wompstompfilms.com, WOMPSTOMPfilms.com. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Please follow us there. And then we have a few screenings coming up this October. Freak Festival from October 4th, 7th, Idaho Horror Festival, which is October 11th through 14th. In Columbus, Ohio, we have Nightmares Film Festival, which is October 18th to 21st. Crypticon Minneapolis, October 26th to 28th, and then the Boulogne Horror Show in France on Halloween.
Yes, they're on.
Nice.
Yeah.
Coming up on our next podcast, we are continuing our theme of the month, The Clothes Make the Killer, where we will be reviewing Dressed to Kill and Homicidal. As always, me, Vicky, and Keith would like to thank you for tuning in, sharing, downloading, and liking the Literary License podcast. Feel free to drop us a comment, even if you feel like it's maddening. After all, we all go a little mad sometimes. Coming, Mother! Bye, folks.
Bye, guys.
Before we go, got to make one more thingy. Our competition. If you go to www.llpodcast.com and join up to our newsletter, one lucky winner will win a specially made T-shirt, one of a kind. So with that, bye-bye.
Bye.
It's sad when a mother has to speak the words that condemn her own son. But I couldn't allow them to believe that I would commit murder. They'll put him away now, as I should have, years ago. He was always bad, and in the end he intended to tell them I killed those girls and that man, as if I could do anything except just sit and stare, like one of his stuffed birds. Well, they know I can't even move a finger, and I won't. I'll just sit here and be quiet. Just in case they do suspect me. They're probably watching me. Well, let them see what kind of a person I am. I'm not even going to swat that fly. I hope they are watching. They'll see, and they'll know, and they'll say, why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
Oh, she's sweet but a psycho, a little bit psycho. At night she's screaming, I'm on my mind. Oh, she's hot but a psycho, so left but she's right though. At night she's screaming, I'm on my mind. She'll make you curse, but she a blessing. She'll rip your shirt within a second. You'll be coming back for seconds with your play. You just can't help it. No, you'll play along, let her lead you on. You'll be saying no, then saying yes, cause you're messing with your head. Oh, she's sweet but a psycho.
Blood!